Hi guys and welcome to Boring History Relaxing. Tonight we step quietly into the year 1787, a time when the United States is less a country and more a hopeful experiment stitched together by dirt roads, wooden houses, and people who are not entirely sure whether this fragile new nation will actually work. Imagine the soft creak of wagon wheels somewhere down the street, the smell of wood smoke drifting through the cool morning air, and the distant call of a rooster announcing a sunrise over a land that is still figuring itself out. You stand on a narrow street lined with simple wooden buildings. The boards beneath your boots groan slightly as you shift your weight. Somewhere nearby a dog barks lazily. A horse snorts and stamps its hoof. The whole town feels like it is stretching awake after a restless night. Now here is the cheerful part you probably did not expect. If you truly lived here in 1787, there is a very good chance you would not make it past your mid-40s. Life expectancy in the late 18th century hovers somewhere around 40 years for many Americans thanks to illness, accidents, and the occasional questionable medical treatment that we will absolutely talk about later. Cozy, right? But for the moment you are alive, breathing the sharp morning air of a young republic. And before we begin wandering deeper into this strange and fascinating world, a small favour. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, feel free to share where you're listening from and what the local time is for you right now. I always love seeing how far these quiet little history journeys travel across the world. Now dim the lights. The town around you is just beginning to stir. A thin curl of smoke rises from a chimney nearby. The scent of burning oak drifts slowly across the street, mixing with the faint smell of animals and damp earth. You hear the soft clatter of someone opening shutters above you. Wooden hinges complain loudly in the morning quiet. The year is 1787, and although people here may not realize it yet, this is one of the most important years in American history. That is a well-known historical reality. In Philadelphia, a gathering of delegates is currently meeting behind closed doors to write what will become the United States Constitution. The document that eventually shapes the entire structure of American government is literally being drafted, while ordinary people across the country are feeding chickens, fixing fences, and wondering whether their crops will survive the summer. Most of them do not know the details of what is happening in that distant city. In fact, many Americans in 1787 feel uneasy about the whole idea of a strong national government. After all, they just fought a long war to escape the authority of the British Crown. The last thing they want is another distant power telling them how to run their lives. You begin walking slowly down the street. Eat. Your boots press into soft patches of dirt where the road has not quite hardened after last night's moisture. The town itself is small. Maybe a few hundred people live here, possibly a few thousand if you're near one of the larger colonial cities. Compared to modern cities, this place feels almost unbelievably quiet. A wagon rattles past you pulled by a patient horse whose breath clouds in the cool air. The driver tips his hat briefly in greeting. People here tend to acknowledge strangers. In smaller communities, everyone notices unfamiliar faces. Another historical detail worth knowing is that in 1787, roughly 90% of Americans live in rural areas or small towns. Massive cities are still a future development. New York, one of the largest urban centers in the country at this time, has only around 30,000 residents. Today you can fit that many people inside a sports arena. You pass a small building with a hand-painted sign swinging gently above the door. The sign shows a tankard, which means this place serves drinks. Taverns are everywhere in early America, and they are not just for drinking. These taverns function as community hubs where travelers stay the night. Merchants exchange news, and locals gather to talk politics. Newspapers are limited, and information travels slowly, so taverns become the social networks of the 18th century. If people want to know what is happening in the world, they often come here and ask whoever arrived most recently from another town. A rather amusing historical curiosity from this period involves early American attitudes toward alcohol. Beer and cider are consumed regularly by many people, sometimes even with breakfast. Not because everyone is trying to party before sunrise, but because fermented drinks are often safer than untreated water sources. Brewing or fermenting the liquid helps kill certain harmful bacteria. Imagine explaining that to your modern doctor. You continue walking toward the centre of town. The street widens slightly here. A small open area acts as a market square where farmers occasionally bring produce, meat or grain to sell. Right now, only a few carts are present, but activity will grow as the morning progresses. Somewhere a blacksmith begins his day. You hear the steady ring of hammer against metal echo across the square. The rhythm is slow at first, clang, pause, clang. Each strike sends faint vibrations through the quiet air. Blacksmiths are incredibly important in this era. They create and repair tools, horseshoes, nails, hinges, wagon parts, and countless other metal items that keep everyday life functioning. Without them, the entire town would gradually fall apart. As you stand there listening to the metallic rhythm, it is worth mentioning something historians continue to debate. Scholars still argue whether the average American in the late 18th century truly supported the idea of a stronger federal government, or whether many people simply went along with the Constitution because influential leaders pushed it forward. Letters and local records reveal a wide range of opinions. Some citizens feared centralized power. Others believed a stronger national structure was necessary to prevent the young nation from collapsing into chaos. From where you are standing, however, those political arguments feel very far away. A woman carrying a basket passes by you nodding politely, before continuing towards one of the houses nearby. Chickens wander freely near a fence, pecking at the ground in search of insects. Somewhere inside the home a baby begins crying. Life here is simple in some ways and demanding in others. Nearly everything people use must be grown, built, repaired or traded locally. There are no supermarkets, no refrigerators, no trucks delivering supplies overnight. Every loaf of bread begins with someone harvesting grain. Every shirt begins with someone spinning thread. Every wagon wheel represents hours of careful labour. You hear another wagon approaching, its wooden wheels creaking as it rolls slowly over uneven ground. The driver pulls gently on the reins, guiding the horse around a muddy patch in the road. The pace of life is steady but unhurried. Nobody is scrolling through a glowing rectangle while walking down the street. Nobody is rushing to answer messages from 10 different apps. Instead, the town wakes up gradually. Smoke rises from chimneys, doors open, boots step onto dirt roads. And somewhere far away in Philadelphia, a group of delegates are quietly arguing over words that will shape the future of this country. But for you standing here in the cool morning air of 1787, the day is only just beginning. Soon the streets will fill with people starting their routines. Breakfast fires will crackle, markets will open, work will begin, and you will step further into the ordinary fascinating life of early America. The cool morning air lingers as the town slowly gathers momentum around you. The faint mist that hovered above the ground begins to lift, revealing more of the simple wooden buildings lining the street. Their rough planks glow softly in the early sunlight, each structure slightly crooked in its own charming way. Nothing here feels perfectly straight or polished. Every wall and doorway carries the marks of hand tools and patient labour. You take a few slow steps forward and notice how quiet the world still is compared with any modern city. The loudest sounds are natural ones. Roosters calling from nearby yards, a horse shifting its weight beside a hitching post, the creak of a wagon wheel somewhere down the road. The smell of breakfast drifts faintly through the air. A door opens to your left and a man steps outside holding a wooden bucket. He walks past you with a friendly nod, heading toward a small well in the centre of the street. Water must be carried by hand in most towns like this. Indoor plumbing will not become common for many generations. This small detail reminds you of a broader historical reality. In 1787, daily life revolves around physical effort in ways that would surprise most modern people. Almost every routine task requires manual labour. Fetching water, chopping wood, feeding animals, grinding grain, repairing tools. These actions form the rhythm of everyday existence. The man lowers his bucket into the well. You hear the hollow splash as it hits the water below. He pulls it up slowly, the rope sliding through his hands with a soft scraping sound. Across the street, another house is coming alive. A woman opens the shutters, letting a beam of sunlight spill into the small interior. A child peeks out curiously before being gently pulled back inside. Children here wake early because the entire household wakes early. Without electric lighting, people tend to follow the natural cycle of the sun. When darkness arrives, most activity fades. When daylight returns, the town rises with it. You continue walking slowly along the road, noticing the texture of the ground beneath your boots. Some areas are packed dirt, others are muddy patches where wagon wheels have carved deep ruts. When rain falls, these roads become messy obstacles rather than smooth paths. Travelling through town requires patience and good balance. As you pass another building, you hear the muffled sound of grinding from inside. Someone is already at work turning grain into flour using a small handmill. The steady crunch of stone against grain creates a soft, repetitive rhythm. A widely accepted historical observation is that most Americans in the late 18th century lived close to a subsistence level. That does not necessarily mean extreme poverty for everyone, but it does mean that families must constantly produce the basics of survival. Food, clothing, and shelter require continuous attention. You glance toward a nearby yard where a few chickens scratch enthusiastically at the dirt. Their feathers puff up in the morning chill. A wooden fence surrounds them, though they occasionally wander through gaps with impressive determination. Chickens are incredible. Incredibly valuable in this era. They provide eggs, meat, and sometimes feathers used for bedding or writing quills. Nearly every household keeps at least a few animals if space allows. Livestock becomes part of the daily soundtrack of life. A pig grunts somewhere behind a barn. A cow lets out a slow patient moo. The town feels alive with quiet animal noises that modern neighbourhoods rarely experience. You reach a corner where the road bends gently toward the central square. The sunlight now spreads across the buildings, more fully illuminating signs hanging above several doorways. One shows a pair of boots. Another displays a small painted loaf of bread. These simple images help people identify shops even if they cannot read. Literacy is growing in the young United States, but it is far from universal. Many people learn basic reading through church or family instruction, yet plenty of adults rely on symbols rather than written words when navigating town life. Interestingly, historians still debate how widespread literacy truly was in early America. Some scholars argue that the colonies had relatively high literacy compared to parts of Europe, especially in New England, where education was strongly encouraged. Others suggest the numbers may have been somewhat exaggerated by optimistic observers of the time. Either way, books remain precious objects. You pause near the small bakery marked by the painted loaf. Warm air slips through the slightly open door, carrying the comforting scent of fresh bread. The smell is rich and earthy, a mixture of grain and wood smoke. Inside, someone moves about quietly. You hear the scrape of a wooden peel sliding loaves into a brick oven. Bread is one of the most important foods in daily life. Families often bake their own, but small bakeries appear in towns where skilled bakers produce large batches for neighbours and travellers. A rather curious tidbit from this era involves the role of bread in legal disputes. In some colonial communities, officials inspected loaves to ensure bakers were not secretly making them smaller while keeping the same price. Customers took bread very seriously. If a loaf seemed suspiciously light, arguments could follow. You step away from the bakery and continue toward the square. Now more people appear on the streets. A pair of boys hurry past, carrying a bundle of sticks nearly as tall as themselves. They wobble slightly under the weight, but seem proud of their contribution. Children in 1787 begin helping with chores at a young age. There is little separation between childhood and adult responsibility. Learning practical skills early is essential for survival in a world where every pair of hands matters. As you reach the centre of town, the morning sun finally climbs high enough to warm your shoulders. The square looks brighter now, though still calm. A farmer guides a small wagon into position while adjusting the blanket draped over the horse's back. The wooden wheels crack softly as they settle into the dirt. A few early shoppers approach the cart, examining baskets of vegetables. Their voices remain low and relaxed. Nobody here seems to rush. You stand quietly and observe the town coming fully awake. Smoke rises from chimneys. Doors open and close. Conversations begin. The entire place moves like a slow-breathing organism expanding gently with the arrival of daylight. Soon the smells of breakfast will spread through every street. Soon work will begin in earnest, and you will find yourself drawn toward one of the most important moments of the morning, the meal that prepares everyone for a long and demanding day. The town is fully awake now, and the soft quiet of dawn has slowly given way to the gentle hum of morning activity. Smoke curls upward from dozens of chimneys, forming thin grey ribbons that drift lazily across the brightening sky. The smell of breakfast grows stronger with every step you take. It is warm and comforting. Wood smoke baking bread and something sizzling in an iron pan blend together in a way that makes your stomach quietly remind you that you have not eaten yet. You follow the scent toward a modest wooden house near the edge of the square. The door stands slightly open, and from inside you hear the low murmur of conversation and the soft clatter of dishes. Morning meals in 1787 begin early. Most families rise with the sun because the entire day depends on daylight. Work will continue for hours, often until the sky fades into evening, so breakfast needs to be filling enough to carry people through long stretches of labour. Inside the house, a small fire crackles steadily in the hearth. Its warmth spreads across the room, chasing away the last hints of the cool morning air. A cast-iron skillet rests over the flames, and the smell of frying cornmeal drifts toward you. A widely recognised historical fact about this period is that corn plays a central role in American diets. Cornbread porridge and various corn-based dishes appear on tables throughout the colonies in the early United States. Wheat bread is also common in some regions, but corn is hardy, productive, and easier to grow in many areas. You sit quietly near the table as the family finishes preparing their meal. A thick slice of bread is placed before you. It is dense, slightly rough in texture, and still warm from the oven. Beside it sits a small bowl of porridge made from cornmeal and water or milk. A wooden dish holds a few pieces of salt pork lightly browned in the skillet. The food is simple, but it carries an honest richness that comes from fresh ingredients and careful cooking. Across the table, a man pours cider into small mugs. Hard cider is one of the most common drinks in early America. Apples grow abundantly in many regions, and fermenting them provides a reliable beverage that stores well through the seasons. Another historical reality worth noting is that drinking cider or small beer in the morning is not considered unusual at all. Water sources are sometimes questionable, and fermented drinks offer a safer alternative in many communities. You take a sip. The cider tastes sharp and slightly sweet with a faint fizz that lingers on the tongue. It wakes you up more effectively than any modern cup of coffee might. A young girl tears off a piece of bread and dips it into her porridge. Her brother eats quickly, clearly eager to finish breakfast so he can return outside. The adults eat steadily but without hurry. Meals in this era tend to be practical rather than elaborate. People focus on foods that provide energy and nourishment rather than elaborate flavours or decorations. Still, there is comfort here. The warmth of the fire, the scrape of wooden spoons against bowls, the quiet conversation between family members as they prepare for the day. It creates a peaceful moment before the heavier work begins. You glance around the room and notice how everything inside the house reflects a life built from effort. The table is made from thick wooden boards. The chairs are sturdy but simple. Few iron tools hang neatly near the hearth. Nothing here is purely decorative. Every object has a purpose. This reflects a broader truth about life in 1787. Most goods must be produced locally or crafted by hand. Imported luxury items exist, but they are expensive and relatively rare outside larger cities. Even the plates on the table show signs of careful use. A small crack runs along the edge of one dish, repaired with a simple metal staple that keeps it functional. Repairing items rather than replacing them is simply part of daily life. At the far end of the table sits a small jar of honey. The family passes it around sparingly, spreading a thin, golden layer across slices of bread. Sweeteners are valuable in this era, and honey often serves as an accessible alternative to imported sugar. A curious historical tidbit involves how people sometimes sweetened their meals when honey or sugar was scarce. In certain regions, cooks experimented with reducing maple sap into syrup long before maple syrup became widely commercialized. Indigenous communities had practiced this method for generations, and settlers gradually adopted it. You finish your bread, slowly savouring the quiet warmth of the room. Outside the window, the town continues to grow busier. A wagon rolls past its wheels, rumbling softly along the dirt road. Voices drift through the open door as neighbours greet one another on their way to work. While the family gathers their dishes, you notice a small stack of newspapers resting near the corner of the table. Newspapers are becoming more common in the late 18th century, though they remain limited compared with modern publications. One paper carries news from Philadelphia, where the Constitutional Convention is taking place. Delegates from across the states are debating how to structure the government of this new nation. Interestingly, historians still argue whether many ordinary Americans truly grasp the significance of what was happening in Philadelphia during 1787. News travelled slowly, and detailed reports often arrive weeks after events occurred. For many citizens, daily concerns like harvests, livestock, and local trade felt far more immediate than distant political negotiations. The man at the table folds the newspaper thoughtfully before setting it aside. For now, breakfast is finished. Chairs scrape gently against the floor as everyone stands. Bowls are carried toward a basin for washing. The fire is adjusted so it will burn steadily through the morning. Soon each person will head in a different direction. The children will gather kindling and help with chores. The adults will move towards some fields, workshops, and markets. The day ahead will be long filled with effort and small victories. You step back outside into the growing sunlight. The air feels warmer now, and the town hums with steady motion. People carry tools, guide animals, and exchange brief greetings as they begin their routines. Breakfast has done its job. Energy returns to tired muscles. Work waits patiently, and the streets of 1787 America are about to show you just how much effort it takes to keep a simple town running. You step away from the breakfast table and back into the brightening morning, feeling the quiet energy that seems to settle over the town once the first meal of the day is finished. People move with purpose now. Doors open and close more frequently. Wagons creak into motion. The gentle stillness of dawn has given way to the steady rhythm of work. As you walk down the street, one thing becomes increasingly noticeable. Everyone seems to be fixing something. A man sits on a wooden stool outside his house, carefully stitching the torn sleeve of a work shirt. Nearby, a woman shakes out a long linen dress before hanging it over a line stretched between two posts. A boy kneels beside a boot, rubbing grease into the cracked leather with slow determination. Clothing in 1787 is not something people simply replace when it begins to wear out. One widely accepted detail about daily life in this era is that garments are valuable possessions. Producing cloth requires enormous effort. Fibres must be grown or obtained cleaned, spun into thread, woven into fabric, and finally cut and sewn by hand. Because of this long process, even a simple shirt represents hours upon hours of labour. Naturally, nothing goes to waste. You pass a small group gathered near a doorway where a woman works with needle and thread. Her fingers move with remarkable speed as she repairs a tear in a wool coat. Beside her sits a basket filled with patches cut from older garments that can no longer be worn whole. Patchwork is a normal part of fashion here. In fact, it is common for clothing to pass through several stages of use. A coat might begin its life worn proudly by the head of a household. Years later, it may be resized and handed down to a younger family member. Eventually, it might be cut into patches for repairing other garments. After that, the remaining fabric could even become cleaning cloths or stuffing for bedding. Nothing disappears quickly in this world. You glance down at what people around you are wearing. Most clothing is practical rather than decorative. Men typically wear linen shirts beneath waistcoats and wool coats paired with breeches that reach just below the knee. Long stockings cover the lower leg, and sturdy shoes protect the feet from rough ground. Women often wear layered garments consisting of shifts, petticoats, and dresses tied or pinned into place. Aprons are common, protecting the outer clothing while cooking or working. The fabrics feel heavier than many modern materials. Linen and wool dominate everyday wardrobes because they are durable and relatively accessible. Cotton exists but is less widespread than it will become in later decades. Another detail recorded in period accounts involves the colours people prefer. Natural dyes made from plants, roots, and insects produce shades of brown, blue, dull, red, and soft yellow. Bright colours are possible but require more expensive processes, so the streets of 1787 tend to look earthy and subdued rather than brightly fashionable. You watch a tailor emerge from a nearby shop carrying a measuring tape draped around his neck. His sign swings gently above the door painted with the image of scissors. Tailors play an important role in communities like this. They cut and shape garments so that the cloth fits properly, especially for those who can afford something more refined than simple home sewing. He pauses to examine the sleeve of a coat belonging to a customer standing beside him. Cloth is precious enough that mistakes must be avoided. You continue walking, noticing how clothing also reflects social differences within the community. A few individuals wear slightly finer coats made from smoother fabric. Their waistcoats include decorative buttons that catch the sunlight. Others wear garments clearly repaired many times with visible patches stitched carefully across elbows or knees. The contrast reveals subtle layers of wealth without needing words. An interesting little detail from the era concerns how people kept clothing clean. Soap exists, but washing garments is a demanding chore involving heated water scrubbing boards and long drying times. As a result, people often wear protective outer layers like aprons or removable sleeves to shield their main garments from dirt. Laundry day can take an entire day of heavy work. You reach a narrow yard where several pieces of cloth hang from a rope stretched between trees. The fabric flutters gently in the breeze, releasing a faint smell of lye soap and fresh air. Nearby, a wooden tub rests on the ground, still half filled with the cloudy water from the washing process. The woman tending this laundry lifts one piece of cloth and inspects it carefully, squinting against the sunlight before hanging it again. While you watch this quiet scene, it is worth mentioning something that continues to interest historians. Researchers remain divided on how strictly clothing defined social identity in early America. Some scholars suggest that the new republic encouraged simpler dress, compared to European aristocratic fashion, reflecting ideals of equality. Others argue that subtle markers of wealth and status still appeared clearly in fabric quality, tailoring, and accessories. Standing here in the street, you can see hints of both. Many people dress plainly because practicality demands it, yet small details still reveal who might be slightly more prosperous than their neighbours. You continue along the road, passing a young boy struggling to pull on a pair of boots that appear slightly too large for him. He tugs hard at the leather while balancing awkwardly on one foot. His mother watches with mild amusement before finally stepping in to help. Boots, like coats, are expensive enough that children often grow into them rather than receiving perfectly sized pairs from the beginning. When the boy finally stands upright, he stomps both feet proudly against the dirt road as if testing his new armour. The gesture makes you smile. All around you, people finish their small morning repairs. Sleeves are stitched, buttons replaced, hats brushed clean of dust. These little acts prepare everyone for the real labour of the day. Because once the clothing is ready and the tools are gathered, there is very little time left for sitting still. The field shops and workshops of 1787 America are already waiting, and before long you will find yourself stepping into the busy world of trade tools and skilled hands that keep this town alive. With clothing mended and boots firmly pulled on, the town now moves into the full momentum of morning. The streets that felt half asleep earlier have grown lively with the purposeful footsteps and the slow rumble of wagons beginning their daily routes. Sunlight now rests comfortably on the rooftops, warming the wooden boards and drying patches of damp earth left from the night. You step carefully along the main road, quickly realizing that colonial streets are nothing like the smooth paved surfaces most people expect today. The ground is uneven and constantly changing. Wagon wheels carve deep grooves into the dirt, and when rain falls, those grooves transform into thick mud. Even on a dry morning like this one, walking requires attention to every step. A commonly noted reality of towns in the late 18th century is that formal street paving remains rare outside a few larger cities. Most communities rely on packed earth roads that must endure heavy wagon traffic, livestock movement, and unpredictable weather. Your boots sink slightly into a softer section of ground as you pass a cart loaded with barrels. The driver calls gently to his horse, guiding the animal around a puddle that still reflects the pale blue sky. The horse snorts softly, its breath visible in the cool air as it pulls the weight forward. Animal power drives nearly every form of movement in this world. Horses pull wagons, oxen haul heavier loads, and sometimes even people themselves push carts when animals are not available. The pace of travel is steady but slow, and distances that seem trivial today often require hours or even days of effort. The street begins to widen as you approach the heart of town. Several wooden storefronts line both sides of the road, their signs swaying gently above the entrances. Each sign is painted with simple images that signal what waits inside. A boot for the cobbler, a hammer for the smith, a barrel for the cooper who crafts wooden containers. The sounds of work spill out through open doorways. Inside the blacksmith's shop, the steady ring of hammer against glowing metal echoes outwards with rhythmic precision. Each strike sends a bright spray of sparks dancing briefly before fading into the dusty floor. A dependable fact recorded in many early American communities is the central importance of skilled tradespeople. Blacksmiths, coopers, carpenters, and wheelwrights form the mechanical backbone of daily life. Without their work tools, brake wagons fail and buildings slowly fall apart. You pause for a moment near the smithy doorway. The heat rolling out from the forge carries a sharp metallic smell, mixed with coal smoke. Inside, the blacksmith grips a glowing rod of iron with heavy tongs while shaping it carefully against the anvil. Sweat beads across his forehead despite the cool morning air outside. He strikes again. The sound rings through the street like a bell. Nearby, another shop releases a completely different scent into the air. The warm smell of leather drifts from the cobbler's workshop, where boots and shoes are repaired one careful stitch at a time. A small bench sits near the doorway holding several pairs of worn footwear, waiting their turn for repair. Shoes in this period are far too valuable to discard casually. A cobbler can extend the life of boots by replacing soles, stitching torn seams, or reinforcing weak spots in the leather. You notice a man patiently waiting while holding a pair of shoes that look as though they have travelled many miles already. Further down the road, a group of farmers guide their wagons toward the market square. The carts carry baskets of vegetables, sacks of grain, and crates of eggs that shift gently with every bump in the road. The creaking of wooden axles blends with the chatter of neighbours greeting one another as they pass. An unusual little detail from the period involves the way many towns attempted to manage wandering livestock. Chickens, pigs, and occasionally goats often roam freely through the streets. In some places, local rules required animals to wear small bells so their owners could hear where they had wandered. You glance toward a nearby yard where a pig roots enthusiastically beside a fence, completely uninterested in the rules of orderly town planning. The animal snorts happily while searching for scraps. Life here carries a mixture of structure and cheerful disorder. As you continue walking, you notice how people greet one another frequently along the road. Small towns foster a strong sense of familiarity. Even casual encounters turn into brief conversations. News spreads quickly through these daily exchanges. While observing these quiet greetings, it is worth mentioning a question that still attracts attention among historians. Researchers continue to explore how connected these small communities truly were to the wider political developments unfolding across the young nation. Some evidence suggests that news about national events circulated actively through newspapers, travellers, and tavern discussions. Other records hint that many rural residents remained focused primarily on local concerns, hearing about distant politics only occasionally. Standing here among the wagon wheels and workshop doors, it is easy to understand why. When daily survival requires constant attention, abstract political debates may feel distant compared with immediate tasks like repairing tools or harvesting crops. The road ahead grows busier as the morning advances. Two boys run past you, carrying a bundle of rope between them. A woman balances a basket of vegetables on her arm while speaking with a neighbour leaning against a fence. A travelling merchant slowly guides a cart filled with goods from another region. The merchant's wagon carries items that cannot easily be produced locally. Glass bottles, metal utensils, a small crate of tea wrapped carefully in the cloth. Trade routes stretch across the colonies and the new states, connecting distant communities through the slow but reliable networks of commerce. You pause briefly at the edge of the market square again. Now the space feels completely transformed from the quiet clearing you saw earlier. Farmers arrange their produce in neat rows while customers examine baskets and negotiate prices. Voices rise and fall in a gentle buzz of activity. The town is alive now, and as the streets fill with trade conversation and the steady rhythm of labor, you begin to realize that every road in this small American town eventually leads to the same vibrant place. The marketplace where goods change hands, gossip travels faster than wagons, and the pulse of everyday life becomes impossible to miss. You step away from the busy street and toward one of the smaller shops lining the edge of the square. From the outside, the building looks modest, just another wooden structure with a slanted roof and a hand-painted sign hanging above the door. The sign shows a simple image of a wooden barrel which tells you immediately what kind of work happens inside. You push the door gently and it opens with a long wooden creak. Inside, the air smells strongly of fresh wood shavings. Thin curls of pale oak cover the floor like scattered ribbons, crunching softly beneath your boots. Sunlight slips through a small window, catching the floating dust in the air and turning it into tiny glowing particles. A cooper works quietly near a long wooden bench. Coopers are craftsmen who specialize in building barrels and casks, and their work is far more important than you might expect. In the late 18th century, barrels serve as the primary containers for transporting goods. Flour, salted meat, cider, tobacco, nails, even gunpowder all travel inside carefully constructed wooden casks. Without barrels, trade would be nearly impossible. This is one of those practical truths about life in early America that rarely appears in dramatic history books but shapes daily life everywhere. Skilled artisans like coopers form the quiet backbone of the economy. The cooper lifts a curved wooden stave and slides it carefully into place along the growing shape of a barrel. Metal hoops rest nearby, waiting to be hammered around the outside to hold everything together. You watch as he tests the fit with practiced hands. Each piece must align perfectly. If even one stave sits incorrectly, the barrel could leak during transport, ruining whatever goods it carries. The steady tap of his wooden mallet fills the small shop. Nearby, a half-finished barrel stands upright on the floor. Its circular shape is already clear, though the metal bands have not yet been tightened. When complete, the cooper will heat the wood slightly to bend the staves into their final curved form. The craft requires both patience and experience. Many artisans learn their skills through long apprenticeships. A young apprentice might spend years assisting a master craftsman before becoming skilled enough to work independently. Across the room sits a young boy sweeping wood shavings into a pile. His movements are careful but slightly awkward, suggesting he's still learning the rhythm of the work. Young apprentices often begin by handling simple tasks like cleaning the shop, fetching tools, or preparing materials. Gradually they absorb the knowledge of the craft. One firmly established detail from this period is that apprenticeships serve as one of the main paths into skilled trades. Formal schools exist, but many practical professions depend on hands-on training under experienced masters. This system creates tight bonds within workshops. The apprentice glances up briefly as you observe the barrel taking shape. The cooper offers him a few quiet instructions before returning to his work. Outside the shop, you hear the rumble of another wagon passing through the square. The town continues its busy rhythm while craftsmen inside these small buildings focus on their individual tasks. You step back into the sunlight and move toward the next doorway. This shop belongs to a carpenter. The interior smells completely different from the cooper's workspace. Instead of curvied barrel staves, you see long planks stacked neatly against the wall. Wooden beams rest on sturdy sawhorses, and a collection of tools hangs in careful order above the workbench. Planes, chisels, saws, and wooden mallets form the carpenter's essential toolkit. The carpenter himself stands near a large board guiding a handplane smoothly along its surface. With each pass, a thin shaving of wood curls away and falls gently to the floor. The board becomes smoother with every movement. Carpenters shape the physical environment of the town. They build houses, doors, window frames, tables, wagons, and countless other wooden structures that people rely on daily. Their work surrounds you everywhere you look. From the beams in the houses to the benches in the market square, the carpenter's skill helps create the town itself. A curious little practice recorded in some early workshops involves the way craftsmen tested the straightness of boards. Rather than using modern measuring tools, they sometimes held the plank up to the light and sighted along its edge with one eye closed, judging alignment through careful observation. It may look simple, but years of experience sharpen that ability remarkably well. You watch the carpenter pause to inspect his board in exactly this way. He holds it upright, squints slightly, then nods with quiet satisfaction before returning it to the bench. While standing there, you might wonder how busy these workshops truly are in a small town like this. Historians still discuss the extent to which rural craftsmen relied solely on local customers or also produced goods for wider regional trade. Some records show that artisans often travelled between communities offering their services, while others suggest many remained closely tied to their immediate neighbourhoods. What is clear is that skilled labour holds enormous value here. When tools break or buildings need repair, people depend on craftsmen who understand wood, metal, leather, and cloth. You continue along the row of shops, passing a small window where glass bottles catch the sunlight like tiny lanterns. The merchant inside arranges them carefully beside jars of spices and folded cloth imported from distant ports. Trade connects this small town to a much larger world. Ships cross the Atlantic carrying goods between continents. Wagons travel over rough roads linking inland farms to coastal cities. Every object on these shelves represents a long chain of labour and transportation. Yet here in the quiet street, everything feels calm and steady. A hammer taps, a plane scrapes, a broom sweeps wood shavings across the floor. The shops of the town continue their quiet industry, while outside the marketplace grows louder and more crowded. Soon the flow of people and goods will pull you fully into the heart of that bustling market. Because if you want to understand everyday life in 1787, there is no better place to stand than among the farmers, merchants and customers gathered around the busy stalls. You drift slowly towards the marketplace, drawn by the rising murmur of voices and the steady movement of wagons rolling into the square. Earlier this place felt open and quiet, but now it has transformed into the beating heart of the town. Farmers, merchants and neighbours gather beneath the bright morning sky, each bringing something to sell, trade or simply talk about. The ground here is packed firm from years of use. Wagon wheels have pressed the dirt smooth in some places and deeply grooved in others. You step around a narrow rut as a horse pulls a cart past you, its hooves thudding softly against the earth. The square itself is not grand. There are no elaborate stone buildings or towering structures. Instead, you see rows of simple wooden stalls, wagons parked side by side and blankets spread directly on the ground where goods are arranged for display. Yet the energy here is unmistakable. Voices overlap in cheerful negotiation. Laughter breaks out between neighbours who clearly know one another well. Somewhere nearby, a rooster flaps its wings loudly, protesting its temporary confinement inside a wicker basket. You walk towards a stall where a farmer has laid out baskets of vegetables. Carrots, onions and cabbage form neat little piles across the wooden table. The vegetables still carry traces of soil from the morning harvest. Records from the period make it clear that markets like this form a crucial part of everyday life in early American towns. Many families produce much of their own food, but markets allow people to exchange surplus goods for items they cannot easily grow themselves. One farmer might bring extra potatoes, another might offer eggs. Someone else may trade honey smoked meat or woven cloth. Instead of large stores stocked with endless options, communities rely on these gatherings to keep supplies circulating. You watch as a woman carefully inspects a basket of apples, lifting one and turning it slowly in her hand, before placing it back down. The farmer smiles patiently. Negotiation to this before the buying begins. Prices are rarely fixed here. Buyers and sellers often settle on an amount through friendly discussion. Sometimes the exchange does not even involve coins at all. Barter remains common. A person might trade butter for flour or a basket of vegetables for a length of cloth. You hear the quiet clink of metal coins somewhere behind you. Currency certainly exists in 1787, though it can be complicated. Spanish silver dollars circulate widely along with coins from several European countries and a variety of locally issued notes. The young United States is still developing its own stable national currency. You continue walking through the market, noticing how every stall offers something slightly different. One table displays jars of preserved fruit sealed with wax. The glass catches the sunlight and glows like small lanterns. Next to it stands a wagon filled with sacks of grain stacked in careful rows. Further along you find a woman selling freshly baked loaves of bread. Their warm scent spreads across the square, attracting a small cluster of hungry customers. A small but fascinating detail recorded in travel diaries from this era involves the sounds that filled markets like this. Visitors often wrote about the constant blend of accents and dialects. English voices dominate in many regions, but you may also hear German, Dutch, French, or Swedish spoken among settlers whose families arrive from different parts of Europe. The mixture of languages adds another layer of texture to the morning air. Nearby, two boys chase one another between the stalls until a merchant gently waves them away from his carefully arranged goods. They laugh and dart off toward the far side of the square. Life here feels lively but not chaotic. People move slowly enough to greet friends, share news, and pause for conversation. You notice a group gathered around a wagon where a travelling merchant has opened several wooden crates. Inside are items that clearly came from far beyond this town. Fine cloth folded in bright colours, small metal tools, bundles of tea wrapped carefully in paper. Goods like these remind everyone that the town does not exist in isolation. Ships crossing the Atlantic connect American ports with Europe, the Caribbean, and beyond. From those ports, wagons carry imported goods inland along rough roads and rivers. Each object has travelled a long and uncertain path to reach this quiet square. While you observe the crowd, one question that continues to interest researchers concerns just how integrated these markets were across different regions of the early United States. Some historians suggest that local economies remained mostly self-contained, with limited long-distance trade. Others point to shipping records and merchant accounts that reveal a surprisingly active network connecting distant communities. Standing here, both ideas seem possible. Many items clearly come from nearby farms, so there's some methods. Yet the presence of imported tea and cloth hints at a much wider world. You pause beside a stall where a man displays several small wooden boxes filled with nails. Each nail has been forged by hand at a blacksmith's shop. The merchant lifts one box and explains the price to a customer who studies the nails carefully. It might seem strange today, but nails are valuable enough in this era that people sometimes save them when dismantling old buildings. Removing nails carefully allows them to be reused rather than wasted. Every small piece of metal carries worth. A few steps away, a woman opens a cloth bundle to reveal several wedges of cheese. The sharp scent spreads into the air, attracting immediate attention from passing shoppers. She slices off a small sample and offers it to a curious buyer. The buyer tastes it, nods thoughtfully, and soon the two begin discussing a price. The exchange feels friendly rather than hurried. Markets here serve another purpose beyond trade. They are also centres of conversation. Neighbours share local news. Travellers bring stories from other towns. Rumours drift from one group to another, like leaves carried by a light breeze. You overhear a man mentioning political meetings happening in distant cities, though the details remain vague. The conversation soon shifts back to the price of grain. The practical concerns of daily life always return. You stand quietly in the middle of the square, absorbing the sounds and smells surrounding you. Fresh bread, earthy vegetables, horse sweat, wood smoke drifting from nearby homes. The marketplace feels alive with movement and connection. And as the morning continues to unfold, you begin to understand that this lively gathering is not simply a place to buy and sell goods. It is where the town breathes, where stories travel, where the quiet threads of daily life weave together into something larger. Soon you will leave the market behind and follow the road that leads beyond the town's edges. Out there waits the wide countryside where most Americans in 1787 spend their days. And the rhythm of life changes once again. Gradually, the sounds of the marketplace begin to fade behind you as you follow the road that leads out of town. The lively chatter of bargaining voices softens with each step, replaced by quieter sounds carried across open land. The creak of a distant wagon, the rustle of wind passing through tall grass. Somewhere far off, the low call of cattle drifting over the fields. The road itself narrows as it leaves the square. Packed dirt slowly gives way to a rougher track marked by the passing of many wagons over many seasons. Wheel ruts carve long parallel grooves into the earth, guiding travellers almost like rails across the countryside. You walk slowly along this path, noticing how the buildings thin out quickly. In only a few minutes, the cluster of houses that form the town begins to dissolve into scattered farms separated by wide stretches of land. This reflects one of the defining features of life in America during the late 18th century. Population records from the era show that the overwhelming majority of people live outside towns working on farms or small homesteads spread across the countryside. Large urban centres remain rare. For most Americans, daily life unfolds among fields, barns and orchards rather than busy streets. The open landscape feels peaceful compared with the crowded market square. Rolling fields stretch across the gentle hills ahead of you. Wooden fences divide sections of land where crops grow in long, uneven rows. Cornstalks stand tall in one field, their leaves whispering softly as the breeze moves through them. Nearby, a farmer guides a wooden plough pulled by 2 oxen. The animals move slowly but steadily, their broad shoulders leaning into the harness as they drag the iron blade through the soil. Each pass turns the earth into dark furrows ready for planting. You pause along the fence and watch the quiet rhythm of the work. Ploughing requires patience more than speed. The farmer walks carefully behind the plough, adjusting its angle while keeping the oxen moving in a straight line. Sweat darkens the back of his shirt despite the mild temperature. Agricultural life demands constant attention. Seeds must be planted at the right moment. Crops must be protected from pests and unpredictable weather. Animals must be fed and sheltered. The entire year revolves around the cycle of the seasons. An interesting detail mentioned in several farming journals from the 18th century involves the careful observation of nature used to guide planting decisions. Farmers sometimes watched the blooming of certain plants or the return of migratory birds as signals that it was time to sow particular crops. Scientific agricultural calendars would come later. For now, nature itself serves as the guide. You continue along the road until you reach a small farmhouse standing beside a cluster of trees. The building is simple but sturdy, constructed from thick wooden logs fitted tightly together. Smoke rises steadily from the chimney, indicating that someone inside is preparing the midday meal or heating water for chores. A barn stands a short distance away, its wide doors open to reveal shadows and stacked hay inside. Chickens wander freely across the yard, clucking softly as they search for insects in the grass. Life on a farm begins early and rarely slows down. Farm families divide their labour carefully among all available hands. Adults handle the heaviest tasks, but children help with many smaller responsibilities such as collecting eggs, carrying water, or gathering firewood. Every member of the household contributes. A small boy emerges from the barn carrying a bucket nearly as large as his torso. He walks slowly across the yard, concentrating hard to keep from spilling the contents. Milk sloshes gently inside the bucket. One curious habit described in several early American households involves the way milk was often cooled. Without refrigeration, families sometimes lowered sealed containers into nearby wells or cool streams to keep dairy products fresh for a little longer. It may seem unusual, but the steady chill of underground water worked surprisingly well. You lean against the fence for a moment as the boy disappears into the farmhouse. Beyond the yard, another field spreads toward the horizon, where several figures bend over rows of crops. They move slowly, pulling weeds from the soil and tossing them aside. While watching this quiet work, it is worth mentioning a topic that continues to attract discussion among historians. Researchers still examine how productive these early farms truly were compared with later agricultural systems. Some evidence suggests that colonial farmers achieved impressive yields using simple tools and careful crop rotation. Other scholars argue that soil exhaustion and limited technology often kept production levels relatively modest. The truth likely varies from region to region depending on climate, soil quality, and farming knowledge. What remains clear is that farming forms the foundation of the young American economy. The food grown in fields like these feeds towns, supports trade, and sustains the growing population of the new nation. You continue walking along the road as the farmland stretches around you. The breeze carries the earthy scent of freshly turned soil, mixed with the sweet smell of grass warming under the sun. Bees drift lazily between wildflowers growing along the fence line. The quiet rhythm of rural life feels almost hypnotic. No shouting merchants, no crowded stalls, just the steady work of people and animals shaping the land one furrow at a time. Eventually the road curves gently toward another farmhouse, where a team of horses stands hitched beside a wagon. Tools lean against the side of the barn. A ladder rests against the roof where someone has recently repaired loose shingles. Every corner of the farm reveals several signs of constant maintenance, because on land like this the work never truly ends. Fields must be ploughed, fences must be mended, animals must be fed, and the long day of labour for a farmer in 1787 is only just beginning. Soon you will follow one of these farmers through the full routine of a working day, and you may discover that the peaceful countryside hides an astonishing amount of effort behind its quiet beauty. You follow the farmer across the field as the morning sun climbs higher in the sky. The light now spreads broadly over the countryside, warming the soil and drawing a soft haze from the grass. The quiet beauty of the landscape remains, but as you walk beside him, it becomes clear that farm life is far from leisurely. The work begins early and continues without much pause. The farmer reaches the end of the furrow he's been ploughing and gently guides the oxen to turn around. The animals shift their weight with slow patience, hooves pressing deep into the earth as they pivot for another pass across the field. He wipes his brow with the sleeve of his shirt before setting the plough blade back into the soil. The iron edge sinks into the dirt with a dull crunch. One well-documented feature of agricultural life in the late 18th century is the physical intensity of nearly every farming task. Without engines or mechanized equipment, farmers rely entirely on their own strength and the help of animals. Even routine activities such as planting, harvesting, or repairing fences demand hours of steady effort. You walk along the edge of the field while the plough moves forward again. Behind the farmer, the newly turned soil forms dark lines across the ground. Each furrow prepares the land for seeds that will later grow into crops needed for both family consumption and market trade. Corn remains one of the most important crops across many regions. Wheat, rye and barley also appear in fields depending on the climate and soil. Crop rotation already plays a role in many farming routines. Some farmers alternate between grain crops and pasture to keep the soil productive. Though the scientific explanations for soil nutrients are not fully understood yet, generations of observation have shown that rotating crops helps maintain healthier harvests. A small but intriguing detail from several 18th century farm journals involves how farmers sometimes tested soil moisture. One simple method involves squeezing a handful of earth and observing how easily it crumbled apart. If the soil held its shape briefly before breaking, it was often considered ready for planting. It may sound basic, but careful observation of the land forms a kind of practical science passed down through experience. You move toward the barn while the farmer continues ploughing. Inside, the cool shade offers a welcome contrast to the warming fields outside. Stacks of hay rise along the walls, filling the air with a dry, grassy scent. Wooden beams stretch across the ceiling, darkened by years of smoke and dust. Several animals stand quietly in their stalls. A cow chews slowly while watching you with calm curiosity. Nearby, a pair of horses shift their weight and flick their tails at occasional flies. Livestock plays a vital role on farms like this. Cows provide milk that can be turned into butter and cheese. Horses and oxen supply the power needed for ploughing and hauling heavy loads. Chickens produce eggs and meat, while pigs often consume scraps that might otherwise go to waste. The barn serves as both shelter and workplace. You hear footsteps behind you as the farmer enters carrying a bundle of tools. He leans a wooden rake against the wall before checking the feed for the animals. Daily farm routines rarely follow a single task from start to finish. Instead, the work shifts constantly between fields, animals and repairs depending on what the moment requires. While the animals eat, the farmer inspects a section of fence visible through the open barn door. A loose rail has slipped out of place. He grabs a hammer and walks over to fix it immediately. This constant cycle of small repairs is another defining part of rural life in 1787. Wood weathers, tools break, fences loosen. If problems are not fixed quickly, they can grow into larger difficulties that threaten crops or livestock. You watch as he taps the rail back into position with careful strikes. The sound of the hammer echoes softly across the quiet field. Beyond the fence, several rows of crops stretch toward the distant trees. Two children move slowly along the rows, bending occasionally to pull weeds or examine the young plants. Children often become skilled helpers in farm work long before reaching adulthood. Their smaller hands are well suited for tasks like gathering eggs, picking vegetables, or removing weeds between delicate seedlings. Researchers continue to explore how these early experiences shape the lives of rural children. Some historians suggest that farm life fostered strong independence and practical skills at an early age. Others point out that the heavy responsibilities could also limit opportunities for a formal education. Both perspectives appear in personal accounts from the era. As you step back outside the barn, the sun has risen high enough to cast shorter shadows across the fields. The air now carries the warm scent of growing crops mixed with the earthy smell of turned soil. The farmer returns to the plough once more. He clicks softly to the oxen, and the animals lean forward into their harness. The blade cuts another steady line through the ground. You realise that this single field represents only one small piece of the work that must be done. Beyond it lie other fields, gardens and orchards that all demand attention during the growing season. Harvest time will eventually arrive, bringing its own exhausting rush to gather crops before weather or pests destroy them. For now, the steady rhythm of ploughing continues, step after step, furrow after furrow. The quiet countryside hides a demanding schedule that leaves little room for rest. Yet farmers across the young United States repeat this pattern day after day, because the entire nation depends on the food grown in fields like these. As you stand beside the fence watching the plough move across the soil, you begin to understand just how much effort it takes to keep even a single farm running smoothly. And the work of the farmer is only one part of the wider system that supports life in 1787. Soon you will discover how animals themselves become essential partners in this demanding world. Because without horses, oxen, and other creatures sharing the labour, many of these tasks would simply be impossible. You leave the ploughed field behind and follow the farmer toward the edge of the barnyard where several animals stand waiting patiently in the shade. The air carries the warm smell of hay, mixed with the earthy scent of animals and sun-warmed wood. Flies drift lazily through the light, occasionally buzzing past your ear before wandering elsewhere. At first glance, the animals seem calm and ordinary, but the longer you watch, the more it becomes clear that these creatures are among the most valuable workers on the entire farm. The farmer walks toward the pair of oxen you saw earlier in the field. They stand quietly beside the fence, massive shoulders rising and falling with slow breaths. Their hides glisten faintly under the midday sun. He reaches up to adjust the wooden yoke resting across their necks. Accounts from the late 18th century describe oxen as one of the most dependable sources of farm labour. They are not fast animals, but they are strong, patient, and capable of pulling heavy ploughs or wagons across rough land for long hours. For many farmers, a well-trained team of oxen represents the difference between a successful planting season and a failed one. The farmer pats one animal gently along its neck before leading both toward a water trough. The oxen drink deeply their wide tongues, creating steady ripples across the surface of the water. Nearby, two horses stand tethered beside a wagon. Their ears flick back and forth as they watch the activity around them. Unlike oxen, horses move quickly and respond more easily to subtle commands. Farm records and travellers' notes from the time show that horses are often used when speed matters. They pull lighter wagons, carry riders between towns, and help farmers travel greater distances when necessary. The animals stamp their hooves softly against the ground while waiting for their next task. You notice how carefully the farmer checks their harness before returning to the wagon. Leather straps must remain strong and flexible. A broken harness in the middle of a journey could leave both animal and driver stranded far from home. Small details like this matter greatly in a world where every piece of equipment must function reliably. You step closer to the barn where another animal pushes its snout curiously through a wooden gate. It is a pig. The creature snorts loudly, clearly hoping for food, and begins rooting enthusiastically through the straw scattered on the ground. Pigs serve an important role on farms like this because they consume scraps that might otherwise go to waste. Kitchen leftovers, spoiled vegetables and grain remnants often end up in the pig pen. In return, pigs eventually provide meat that can be preserved through salting or smoking. This efficient cycle of use reflects the practical mindset that shapes most farm routines. A small but memorable habit mentioned in several farming diaries involves the way some farmers trained pigs to return home in the evening. Instead of chasing them through fields, owners sometimes rang a bell or shook a bucket of feed at the same time every night. Over time, the pigs learned to associate the sound with dinner and wandered back to the farmyard on their own. It sounds almost like calling pets today, though these animals clearly serve a more practical purpose. You hear clucking behind you and turn to see a cluster of chickens wandering across the yard. They move quickly, darting between patches of grass while pecking at insects. Chickens may appear small compared with the oxen and horses, yet they are among the most productive animals on the farm. Eggs provide a reliable source of food throughout much of the year. The farmer bends down to scatter a handful of grain across the ground. The chickens rush forward instantly, their feathers rustling in a flurry of movement as they compete for the scattered seeds. You notice a small wooden coop standing nearby where the birds spend the night safe from predators. Farm animals like these form a living system that supports the entire household. Milk from cows becomes butter and cheese. Eggs from chickens appear on the breakfast table. Animals provide power for ploughing, hauling and travel. Nothing exists here purely for decoration. While you watch the farmer move calmly among his animals, a question that continues to interest historians concerns how early American farmers balanced animal care with crop production. Some scholars suggest that livestock played an even greater economic role than crops in certain regions, especially where dairy products or meat could be traded locally. Others argue that grain production remained the dominant focus for most farms. The surviving records showed a mixture of both approaches depending on geography and market opportunities. The farmer finishes checking the animals and walks toward the wagon beside the barn. He lifts a sack of grain and loads it carefully onto the back, preparing for a trip either to the market or to another nearby farm. The horses shift slightly as he tightens the harness straps across their shoulders. You step aside as the wagon begins to move. The wheels roll slowly across the dirt yard before turning toward the road that leads back toward the town. The horses lean forward into their harness and the wagon creaks gently under its weight. Animal power moves the world of 1787. Every journey, every delivery, every trip to market depends on creatures like these working alongside people. As the wagon disappears down the road, the barnyard grows quiet again except for the soft sounds of animals moving through straw. The oxen return to their shade, the chickens resume scratching for insects, the pig continues its determined search for scraps. The farm settles briefly into a calm pause before the next round of work begins, and soon you will step inside one of the homes that stand quietly beside these busy fields where families gather each evening around firelight to rest from the long labour of the day. The wagon disappears down the dusty road, its wheels slowly fading from view as the horses carry it towards its town. You remain standing in the quiet farmyard for a moment, listening to the gentle sounds that surround you. A chicken scratches through the dry straw. The cow in the barn shifts its weight and exhales softly. The breeze slides through the tall grass beyond the fence and makes a whispering sound. Almost resembles distant waves. Eventually you turn toward the farmhouse itself. From the outside it looks sturdy but simple. The walls are built from thick logs stacked carefully on top of one another. Small gaps between the logs have been filled with clay and straw to keep out the wind. The roof slopes sharply covered with wooden shingles that have darkened after years of rain and sun. This kind of construction appears frequently across rural America during the late 18th century. Building records and surviving homes show that families often relied on timber from nearby forests. Wood is abundant in many regions, and settlers quickly learn how to shape logs into durable structures that can withstand the seasons. You step closer and run your hand lightly along the surface of one of the logs. The wood feels rough beneath your fingers. Small grooves from the original cutting tools remain visible even after years of weathering. Each mark reflects the work of axes and adzes used to shape the timber. A narrow door stands slightly open. You push it gently and step inside. The air within the house feels cooler than outside, shaded from the strong midday sun. Light enters through a few small windows spreading across the wooden floor in soft rectangles. The interior is not large. Most farmhouses of this period contain only a few rooms, sometimes just one main space that serves many purposes. Cooking, eating, sewing and conversation often happen within the same area. You notice the large fireplace immediately. It dominates one wall of the room, built from thick stone that absorbs heat from the fire burning inside. A black iron pot hangs from a metal hook over the flames. The smell of simmering vegetables drifts gently into the room. Fireplaces like this serve as the heart of the household. Cooking happens here. Water is heated here. During colder months, the entire family gathers near the fire for warmth and light. Without it, daily life would become extremely difficult. You walk slowly around the room, observing the objects that fill the space. A sturdy wooden table stands near the center. Several chairs surround it, each slightly different in shape, suggesting they may have been made or repaired at different times. Shelves along the wall hold simple plates, bowls, and metal utensils. Everything appears practical rather than decorative. Household inventories from the 18th century reveal that most families own relatively few possessions compared with modern standards. Each object must justify the effort required to obtain or create it. A small spinning wheel rests near one corner of the room. Beside it sits a basket filled with soft wool waiting to be spun into thread. Spinning thread at home remains an important task for many families. Cloth production does not rely entirely on distant factories yet. Instead, households often produce at least part of their own yarn, which can later be woven into fabric or traded with local weavers. You can almost imagine the quiet hum of the spinning wheel turning in the evening while the family talks beside the fire. A small but intriguing household practice recorded in several diaries involves the careful saving of leftover ashes from the fireplace. These ashes could be mixed with water to produce a substance used in making lye soap. Nothing from the fire was wasted if it could serve another purpose. You glance back toward the hearth where the iron pot bubbles gently. A wooden spoon rests nearby for stirring the stew. The smell is warm and earthy, suggesting onions, herbs, and perhaps bits of salted meat simmering slowly together. While examining the room, you may wonder how comfortable life inside homes like this truly was. Historians often discuss the balance between hardship and stability in early American households. Some researchers emphasize the physical challenges faced by families living with limited space and few conveniences. Others point out that these homes could also provide a strong sense of security and independence, especially for farmers who owned the land around them. Both perspectives appear in letters and journals from the time. For some families, the farmhouse represented freedom and self-sufficiency. For others, it meant long days of work simply to maintain a modest standard of living. You move towards a doorway leading into a smaller adjoining room. Inside, you find several narrow beds arranged along the walls. Thick quilts cover the mattresses, many of them sewn from pieces of cloth that clearly came from older garments. Patchwork quilts serve both practical and creative purposes. They provide warmth during cold nights, while also allowing families to reuse fabric that might otherwise be discarded. The colours vary from faded blues to soft browns and dull reds. Even here, practicality shapes every choice. A wooden chest sits at the foot of one bed. When you lift the lid slightly, you see folded clothing stored neatly inside. Without closets or modern furniture, chests like this often hold a household's most valuable belongings. The room remains quiet except for the distant clucking of chickens outside. Sunlight slips through the small window and lands gently across the floorboards. The house feels peaceful. After the long hours of fieldwork, spaces like this provide the only real refuge from the demands of the outside world. Soon evening will come and families will gather here once again around the fire. But before the day ends, there are still many hours of labour and activity waiting across the farms and towns of 1787 America. And as daylight begins its slow journey toward afternoon, you will soon see how darkness itself changes the rhythm of life inside these homes. Because when the sun disappears, light becomes a precious resource. And the night transforms everything. The quiet inside the farmhouse lingers around you for a moment longer, before you step back into the daylight. Outside, the sun has climbed higher and the fields glow with a warm golden light that spreads across the rolling land. The morning work continues steadily. A distant axe strikes wood somewhere near the tree line, and the soft creak of wagon wheels drifts along the road. Yet as bright as the afternoon feels right now, everyone living here knows something very important. The sun will eventually disappear, and when it does, the entire rhythm of life will change. You turn back toward the farmhouse door and step inside once again. Even during the day, the interior remains dim compared with the bright world outside. Sunlight enters through the small windows, but it does not fully illuminate every corner. As evening approaches, the room will grow darker quickly. One well-known aspect of daily life in the 18th century is that people must plan their evenings carefully around the limited light available after sunset. Without electricity, illumination depends almost entirely on fire. Candles, oil lamps, and the glow of the fireplace provide the only sources of light once the sky fades into darkness. You walk toward a small shelf mounted on the wall. Several candles rest there, each shaped from pale wax with a thin wick running through the centre. They are simple but valuable objects. Producing candles requires time and resources, which means they cannot be burned carelessly. Many households make their own candles from animal fat known as tallow. The process involves repeatedly dipping a wick into melted fat until enough layers build up to form a solid candle. The result works well enough, though the smell can sometimes be strong. Families who can afford it sometimes purchase beeswax candles instead. Beeswax burns more cleanly and produces a softer, more pleasant scent. However, it is also more expensive. You lift one candle gently from the shelf and examine its slightly uneven shape. Each one represents careful work. A small but interesting habit mentioned in several early household guides involves trimming the wick before lighting a candle. Keeping the wick short helped reduce smoke and allowed the candle to burn more evenly. Even small improvements in lighting mattered greatly in homes like this. You place the candle back and move closer to the fireplace. The flames flicker softly beneath the iron pot that continues to simmer. The fire produces both warmth and light, casting shifting patterns across the walls of the room. During the evening hours, families often gather close to the hearth where the glow is strongest. This central fire becomes the social centre of the home. Children complete small chores or listen to stories. Adults mend clothing, spin thread, or prepare tools for the next day. Conversations unfold slowly as the fire crackles and shadows dance across the room. You can almost picture the scene already. A parent seated near the spinning wheel, a child curled beneath a quilt, the steady turning of the wheel creating a soft humming sound in the quiet house. While thinking about these peaceful evenings, it is worth noting something historians continue to explore. Scholars examining daily life in early America often discuss how darkness shaped both work and leisure. Some evidence suggests that families went to sleep much earlier than people do today simply because there was little light available for nighttime activity. Other records hint that evening hours could still be lively with storytelling music or quiet crafts performed by candlelight. The truth likely varied depending on the season and the household. Winter nights, for example, lasted much longer than summer evenings. You glance toward one of the small windows where the bright afternoon sky still fills up the view. The difference between daylight and night in this era is dramatic. When the sun disappears, the outside world becomes almost completely dark. Without streetlights or illuminated buildings, towns and farms fade into shadow. Only scattered points of candlelight appear through windows like small stars across the landscape. Travelling after dark can be difficult and sometimes dangerous. Roads are uneven, and travellers must rely on lanterns to guide their way. Many people simply avoid unnecessary journeys once the sun has set. You move toward a wooden hook hanging near the door where a lantern rests. The lantern is made from metal with glass panels protecting the flame inside. When lit, it provides a steadier source of light than a simple candle exposed to the wind. Farmers often carry lanterns when tending animals after sunset, or walking between buildings on the property. The glass panels are slightly fogged from past use, giving the lantern a cloudy appearance. A small but charming detail recorded in several rural letters involves how children sometimes entertained themselves by casting shadow shapes on the walls using candlelight. Hands placed between the flame and the wall could create the silhouettes of animals or imaginary creatures. Even in a world with limited entertainment, creativity finds its way into quiet moments. You set the lantern back on its hook and return your attention to the fireplace. The flames shift and pop softly as a small piece of wood collapses inward. Sparks flicker briefly before disappearing. The house remains calm and quiet, but you know that as evening arrives, the glow of fire and candlelight will transform this room into the centre of family life. Meals will be eaten here, stories will be shared, plans for tomorrow's work will be discussed while shadows stretch across the walls. For now, though, the afternoon continues outside. The fields still need tending. Animals must be fed again before nightfall. And as the hours pass, families across the countryside will slowly prepare for the moment when daylight fades and the gentle glow of candlelight takes over. Because in 1787, darkness is not just the end of the day. It is the signal that a completely different pace of life is about to begin. You linger near the warm glow of the fireplace as the afternoon light slowly shifts across the farmhouse floor. Outside, the fields continue their quiet work under the sun. But inside the house, another kind of life unfolds. The room feels calm and lived in, shaped by the daily presence of the people who call this place home. A wooden chair sits near the table, its surface polished smooth from years of use. Beside it stands the spinning wheel you noticed earlier, silent for now, but clearly well worn. You can almost imagine the gentle hum it produces in the evening when the household gathers here together. Family life in 1787 tends to revolve around spaces like this. Daily records from the late 18th century show that most farm families live together in relatively small homes where nearly every activity happens within a few shared rooms. Privacy in the modern sense is rare. Parents, children, and sometimes extended relatives all occupy the same domestic space. Yet the closeness also creates a strong sense of cooperation. Everyone in the household contributes to keeping things running. You walk slowly towards the table where a small basket of vegetables sits, waiting to be prepared for the evening meal. Carrots, onions, and a handful of herbs rest beside a wooden cutting board. The smell of the simmering stew in the hearth continues to fill the air. Cooking is only one of many responsibilities managed inside the home. A woman enters the room carrying a bundle of cloth folded carefully up against her arm. She places it on the table and begins sorting through the pieces. Some appear to be newly woven fabric. Others are clearly fragments from older garments that have been cut apart for reuse. Cloth holds enormous value in this period because fabric takes so long to produce. Households treat it almost like currency. Even small scraps may be saved for patching clothing, sewing quilts, or repairing household linens. You watch as she threads a needle and begins stitching a patch onto the sleeve of a worn shirt. The movement is practiced and steady. In homes across the young United States, sewing and mending occupy a significant portion of the daily domestic work. Many garments last for years, particularly because they are constantly repaired rather than replaced. Nearby, two children sit on the floor beside a small wooden chest. They sort through a collection of objects that look like toys, though they are far simpler than what many children today might recognize. One child holds a carved wooden horse no larger than the palm of his hand. The figure is rough but clearly shaped with care. Another child rolls a small hoop along the floor with a stick guiding it in wide circles while laughing quietly. One curious detail mentioned in several personal journals from the period describes how many children's toys were homemade. Carved animals, cloth dolls, and simple games using sticks or stones often provided hours of entertainment. Without factories producing colourful toys, imagination filled the gap. You sit quietly and watch the children play. Their laughter echoes softly against the wooden walls while the fire crackles behind you. Family life here feels busy but gentle. Chores happen alongside conversation. Work blends naturally with moments of play. Everyone moves around the same room, sharing both space and responsibility. While observing this scene, it is worth noting a question that still attracts discussion among historians. Scholars studying early American households continue to examine how family structures differed between regions and social classes. Some evidence suggests that large extended families living together were common in rural areas. Other records show smaller nuclear families managing farms on their own. The historical picture remains complex because experiences varied widely depending on location, wealth, and circumstance. You glance toward the doorway where sunlight continues to spill into the room from outside. A breeze moves gently through the open door, carrying with it the scent of grass and distant soil. Somewhere in the yard, a chicken clucks loudly as if announcing an important discovery in the dirt. The woman at the table pauses her sewing for a moment and looks toward the window, perhaps checking the position of the sun. Time in this world is often measured by light rather than clocks. When the sun reaches a certain angle in the sky, it signals that animals must be fed again or that supper preparation should begin. Clocks do exist in some households, but they are not universal. Instead, daily routines follow patterns learned through observation of the natural world. You stand and walk slowly towards the small bedroom where you looked earlier. The beds remain neatly arranged beneath their patchwork quilts. The wooden chest still sits at the foot of one mattress, holding clothing carefully folded. These sleeping spaces will fill again later tonight when the family gathers here after a long day. Even now, the quiet room seems to hold a sense of rest, waiting patiently for evening. You return to the main room where the stew continues to bubble gently above the fire. The smell has grown richer, suggesting the meal is nearly ready. Outside, the afternoon slowly begins its gradual shift toward evening. Shadows stretch longer across the fields and the towns of farm work begin to harden. Soon the farmer will return from the fields. Animals will be gathered for the night, and the farmhouse will once again become the centre of family life as everyone settles together for supper. But before that peaceful evening arrives, there is still another part of daily life in 1787 that shapes how children grow into adults in this demanding world. Because childhood here does not last as long as it does today, and the lessons young people learn begin very early. You remain in the warm farmhouse for a little while longer, as the afternoon continues to soften outside. The quiet sound of the children playing near the hearth gradually fades as their attention shifts from toys to chores. One of them is called gently by an adult voice and soon stands up brushing dust from his knees before heading toward the door. Childhood in 1787 unfolds very differently from what many people imagine today. The carved wooden horse and rolling hoop you saw earlier provide moments of play, but that they represent only a small portion of daily life. Most children in early American households begin helping with useful tasks almost as soon as they're physically able. Letters and farm journals from the late 18th century repeatedly describe young boys and girls assisting their families long before reaching adulthood. The work they perform might begin with simple duties such as gathering eggs, bringing water from a well, or collecting kindling for the fireplace. You step outside and watch as the boy who'd been playing earlier now walks carefully across the yard with a small basket. He heads straight toward the chicken coop where several hens scratch through the dirt. He crouches down patiently beside the coop. After a moment, he reaches inside and lifts out a freshly laid egg, placing it gently into the basket. Soon another egg follows. The task may look small, yet it carries real importance for the household. Eggs provide regular nourishment and sometimes extra goods that can be traded or sold at the market. Teaching children to care for animals and gather food helps ensure that farms operate smoothly throughout the year. Another child passes by carrying a bundle of sticks gathered from the edge of the woods. The sticks will become tomorrow's firewood once they're chopped into smaller pieces. You notice how confidently the children move through these routines. Their actions suggest that they have practiced these chores many times before. One interesting custom mentioned in several early American diaries involves how children sometimes learned responsibility through caring for a small personal animal. A child might be given a chicken or a young lamb to raise. The animal belonged to them and its well-being depended entirely on their attention. If the animal grew strong and healthy, it could later be sold or traded, providing the child with their first small earnings. Such practices helped young people understand both work and value from an early age. You follow the children towards the barn where the farmer has returned from the fields. His boots carry the dark dust of freshly turned soil and his shoulders look slightly tired from the long hours behind the plough. Yet he still pauses to speak with the children as they arrive. One boy proudly shows the eggs he collected. The farmer nods with approval before placing the basket carefully on the wooden shelf. Moments like this form quiet lessons. Children observe the routines of adults and gradually learn the skills needed to manage farms, homes, and trades of their own one day. While watching this exchange, historians often consider how such early responsibilities shaped the transition from childhood to adulthood in early America. Some researchers believe that young people developed independence and practical knowledge much sooner than children do in modern societies. Others note that the demands of work could leave little room for formal education or extended play. Both perspectives appear in surviving letters written by families during this period. You step into the barn where the farmer begins preparing feed for the animals. One of the older children helps scoop grain into a bucket, while another carries water to refill the trough. Their movements are careful and deliberate. No one rushes. Instead, each person completes their task in a steady rhythm that has likely been repeated countless times. A rooster crows loudly from the corner of the barn, perhaps annoyed that attention has shifted away from him. The sound echoes briefly before fading into the soft rustle of hay. You walk back towards the farmhouse and see another child sitting near the doorway with a small slate resting on his lap. He holds a piece of chalk and carefully traces letters across the surface. Education does exist for children in this era, though it often takes place alongside work rather than replacing it. Some families teach reading and writing at home using Bibles, primers, or handwritten lessons. In towns and villages, small schools sometimes operate where a single teacher instructs children of many different ages in the same room. The lessons tend to focus on practical skills. Reading allows people to understand religious texts, legal documents, and business records. Writing helps with letters and bookkeeping. Arithmetic assists with trade and market transactions. While formal schooling varies widely from place to place, most families value at least basic literacy. You watch as the child slowly finishes writing a word on the slate before wiping it clean with the sleeve of his shirt and beginning again. The quiet concentration on his face suggests that learning carries its own kind of satisfaction. A breeze moves gently through the open doorway behind him, carrying the scent of evening grass. The sun now hangs lower in the sky, painting the fields with longer shadows. Across the farmyard, the animals settle into their evening routines. Chickens gather near the coop. The cow shifts patiently into the ban while waiting to be milked. Children who spent the morning helping with chores and the afternoon playing now return to smaller tasks before supper. This steady mixture of work, learning, and family life shapes the early years of nearly every young person growing up in 1787 America. By the time they reach their teenage years, many already understand the essential skills required to run farms, households, or workshops. And as the golden light of evening begins to spread across the countryside, the entire family will soon gather again inside the farmhouse for the next important moment of the day. The meal that brings everyone together before night settles over the fields. The evening light spreads gently across the farmyard as the children finish their last small chores of the day. The sky above the fields turns a softer shade of gold, and the long shadows of the barn and fence stretch slowly across the grass. Inside the farmhouse, the smell of supper grows stronger as the stew in the iron pot continues to simmer. Yet before the family gathers around the table, your attention returns to the boy sitting near the doorway with his slate and chalk. He pauses, studying the letters he has written, before carefully wiping the slate clean again. The faint scratch of chalk against stone repeats in a slow rhythm that almost matches the quiet sounds of the evening outside. Learning to read and write holds a special place in many early American households. Documents from the late 18th century reveal that literacy was widely encouraged, especially in regions where a religious community believed every person should be able to read scripture for themselves. Parents often took responsibility for teaching basic reading skills at home, using whatever books were available. Books, however, were not always easy to obtain. You step closer and notice the small stack resting beside the boy on the floor. The top book has a worn leather cover and thick yellowed pages. Its corners are rounded from years of use. Printed books exist in growing numbers during this period, but they remain valuable objects that families treat with great care. Printers in towns and cities produce almanacs, religious texts, and small school books designed to help children learn letters and numbers. One of the most widely used teaching tools in early American education is the primer, a small book filled with alphabet lessons, short rhymes, and moral stories meant to guide both reading and character. The boy slowly traces another line of letters. A, B, C. He murmurs the sounds quietly to himself while writing. Education here unfolds gradually rather than through rigid schedules. Children practice reading in spare moments between chores. Older siblings sometimes help teach younger ones. Parents review lessons during quiet evenings beside the fireplace. You step outside for a moment and follow a narrow path leading toward the edge of the nearby road. Not far away, another small building stands among a cluster of trees. This is the local schoolhouse. The structure looks modest compared with larger buildings in town. Rough wooden boards form its walls and a single chimney rises from the roof. A small window allows daylight to enter the room where lessons take place. Schoolhouses like this often serve entire communities. Historical records from the period describe classrooms where children of many different ages sit together while a single teacher guides them through reading, writing, and arithmetic. Younger students practice letters while older ones work through more advanced problems. The room may contain only a few benches and a simple writing desk, yet within those walls important learning happens. You step closer to the door and imagine what the classroom might look like during the day. Children repeating lessons aloud, chalk scraping across slates, the teacher walking slowly between benches offering corrections and encouragement. One unusual detail mentioned in several early school accounts involves the way students sometimes memorize large portions of text through repetition. Instead of silently reading alone, children often recited passages together out loud. The combined sound of many voices speaking the same lines created a steady chant that filled the room. This method may sound strange today, but it helped students remember lessons in a time when books were limited and written materials could not be easily copied. You glance toward the surrounding fields where the sun continues its slow descent. While many families value education, historians continue to examine how consistently children attended school during this era. Farm work often required extra help during planting and harvest seasons, which meant some students attended classes only part of the year. In other cases, distance from the schoolhouse made daily travel difficult. The result was an educational experience that varied greatly depending on geography, family needs, and community resources. You return toward the farmhouse just as the farmer and his children walk back from the barn. The evening chores appear complete. The animals have been fed. The eggs gathered earlier rest safely in the kitchen. The last light of day glows softly across the windows of the house. Inside the table has been prepared for supper. Wooden bowls and simple utensils wait beside thick slices of bread. The iron pot is lifted carefully from the fire and placed at the center of the table where its contents release a cloud of warm steam. The family gathers slowly around their seats. Before the meal begins, the farmer bows his head for a brief moment of quiet reflection. The room grows still as everyone pauses together. Then the first bowls of stew are served. You sit among them as the gentle sounds of supper begin. Spoons move slowly through the warm broth. Bread is torn into pieces and dipped into the stew. Conversation unfolds in low voices as the family shares small details from the day. The children speak about the eggs they gathered and the letters practiced on the slate. The farmer mentions the progress made in the fields. The simple meal feels satisfying after a long day of work. Outside the windows, the sky deepens into shades of orange and purple. Night approaches quietly across the countryside. Soon the last of the daylight will fade, and the gentle glow of firelight will once again become the center of life inside the farmhouse. Because when darkness settles over the land, the world of 1787 changes its pace once more, and the next gathering place will not be the schoolhouse or the farmyard. It will be the church that stands at the heart of the community. The last bowls of stew are slowly emptied as evening settles across the farm. Outside the windows, the sky has faded into deeper shades of blue and the distant fields now appear as dark shapes under the growing twilight. Inside the farmhouse, the fire continues to glow warmly, casting flickering light across the wooden walls. The family finishes supper in an unhurried way. Bread crumbs scatter across the table. The iron pot is carefully returned to the hearth. One of the children carries the wooden bowls toward a basin where they will be washed before bedtime. Yet even as the meal ends, the evening does not immediately become quiet. Instead, another part of community life often begins. You step outside and notice that faint lights appear in the distance. Small lanterns glow near neighbouring houses, and the quiet road leading toward town shows occasional movement as people walk or ride slowly along its path. Many communities in 1787 gather regularly for church meetings that extend beyond Sunday worship alone. Accounts written by ministers and travellers during the late 18th century describe churches as central gathering places where neighbours share news, discuss concerns, and strengthen social ties. In small towns especially, the church serves not only as a place of prayer, but also as one of the few buildings large enough to bring the entire community together. You begin walking along the road that leads back toward town. The cool evening air carries the scent of damp soil and distant wood smoke. Crickets begin their steady chorus in the tall grass, creating a soft background rhythm that follows you as you move. Soon the silhouette of the church appears ahead. It stands near the centre of the settlement, a modest structure built from wood, with a tall steeple rising above the roofline. The windows glow faintly from the candlelight inside. As you approach the door, you hear quiet voices drifting outward. People are already gathering. Inside the room feels warm and gently illuminated by rows of candles placed along the walls. Wooden benches stretch across the floor, filling the space with simple seating. Families sit together while neighbours greet one another in low voices. The atmosphere is calm and respectful, yet also friendly. Church gatherings often combine religious devotion with social connection. After long days of work in fields and workshops, these meetings offer a chance for people to step away from their individual tasks and feel part of something larger. You take a seat near the back of the room. A minister stands near the front, speaking quietly with several members of the congregation. His clothing is plain but neat, and his expression carries a sense of calm authority. Religious life shapes many aspects of daily routines during this period. Town records and personal letters frequently mention church attendance as a regular part of community life. Sermons provide moral guidance, but they also serve as opportunities for sharing news, settling disputes, and strengthening bonds between families. Children sit beside their parents on the benches, their legs swinging gently above the floor. One boy leans against his mother's shoulder while listening to the murmured conversations around him. A small but intriguing practice described in several 18th century church accounts involves the use of long wooden poles by attendants known as tithing men. These men quietly walked the aisles during lengthy sermons to keep order among the congregation. One end of the pole sometimes held a feather used to gently wake anyone who fell asleep during the service. The other end occasionally carried a small knob used to tap restless children who were causing too much distraction. The method may sound unusual today, but it reflected the importance placed on maintaining attention during worship. You glance around the room as more people arrive. Lantern light flickers against the wooden beams overhead. Shadows shift across the walls as candles burn steadily along their holders. The minister eventually steps forward and the quiet conversations gradually fade. A hymn begins. The voices of the congregation rise together in a slow and steady melody that fills the small building. The sound is not polished like a trained choir, but it carries a warmth that spreads throughout the room. Each voice blends with the others until the entire church seems to hum gently with the song. Moments like this offer a rare pause in the demanding rhythm of daily life. While observing the gathering, historians continue to examine how deeply religion influenced early American communities. Some scholars emphasize the strong role churches played in shaping moral expectations and social behavior. Others suggest that religious participation varied widely depending on region, personal belief, and local traditions. The historical record shows both devotion and diversity within these communities. The hymn slowly fades and the minister begins speaking. His voice remains calm and measured, carrying easily through the quiet room. He speaks about patience, responsibility, and the importance of caring for one's neighbours. The message reflects values that many people here already practice through their daily work and cooperation. As the meeting continues, you notice how the atmosphere remains peaceful rather than solemn. Children grow drowsy beside their parents. Lantern flames flicker softly. Outside, the night sky deepens above the town. Eventually, the gathering concludes and people rise slowly from their benches. Conversations begin again as neighbours step outside into the cool darkness. Lanterns glow along the road as families begin the short journeys back toward their homes. The church door closes gently behind the last visitors. You walk with them beneath the quiet stars, listening to the steady chorus of insects in the fields. Another day in 1787 is drawing toward its end. Yet in one place nearby, the night is only just beginning to grow lively. Because not far from the peaceful church stands another building where voices, laughter and stories will soon fill the air. The tavern. The church grows quiet behind you as families drift slowly back along the dim road toward their homes. Lanterns glow like small moving stars in the darkness, bobbing gently with each step. The air has cooled now, and the smell of damp earth rises from the fields on either side of the path. Most people will return home after the gathering, but not everyone. A warm light shines from a building a short distance away near the edge of town. Even from here you can hear a low hum of conversation drifting through the night air. You follow the sound. As you approach, the glow from the windows grows brighter and the voices become clearer. Laughter rises above the steady murmur of conversation. You have arrived at the tavern. The door opens with a soft push, and immediately the room welcomes you with warmth and noise, very different from the quiet of the church. Candles flicker on wooden tables, casting lively shadows that dance across the walls. The smell of roasted meat pipe smoke and cider fills the air. Taverns play a surprisingly important role in the everyday life of early American towns. Travelers' accounts and town records frequently describe these establishments as gathering places where people exchange news, conduct business, and relax after long days of work. You step inside and take a moment to absorb the scene. A group of farmers sits at one table discussing the progress of the harvest. Their hands wrap around wooden mugs filled with cider. At another table, two merchants lean over a set of papers while speaking quietly about prices and deliveries. Near the fireplace, a traveller recounts stories from another town many miles away. The entire room buzzes with quiet energy. Unlike the structured calm of the church, the tavern allows conversation to flow freely. News travels quickly here because travellers often stop for food, drink, and a place to sleep during long journeys. In an era before telegraphs or newspapers delivered instantly across the country, taverns become informal centres of information. If someone wants to know what is happening in distant cities, this is often the place to ask. You take a seat on a wooden bench near the wall. A man behind the counter pours cider from a large barrel into a mug and slides it across the surface of the table to a waiting customer. Cider remains one of the most common drinks in early American taverns. Apple orchards thrive in many regions, and fermented cider provides a refreshing beverage that stores well through the year. Beer and rum also appear on tavern menus, though. Availability can vary depending on trade and local production. You lift the mug places before you and notice how cool the wood feels in your hands. The drink inside tastes crisp and slightly tart. A small but entertaining detail mentioned in several 18th century travel journals involves the communal seating arrangements in taverns. Strangers often shared tables and benches simply because space was limited. As a result, conversations between people who had never met before happened naturally throughout the evening. It was entirely possible to sit beside a farmer, a merchant and a traveller all within the same hour. The man seated next to you begins speaking about a recent trip he made to a larger town along the coast. He describes ships arriving with cargo from distant ports and markets crowded with goods from across the Atlantic. Several listeners lean closer to hear the story. News from far away always attracts attention. While watching the conversation unfold, historians often reflect on how taverns helped shape political discussions in the early United States. Many important debates about government policies, taxes, and local decisions took place in these informal settings long before formal meetings were organized. The relaxed atmosphere allowed people to speak openly about their opinions. Some of the ideas that later shaped the nation's future may have first been voiced in rooms very much like this one. Across the tavern, a musician lifts a small fiddle and begins playing a lively tune. The melody fills the room with cheerful rhythm, and a few people tap their boots gently against the wooden floor in time with the music. The sound adds warmth to the already lively space. Nearby, two men lean over a small board where carved pieces move slowly between them. They are playing a game of drafts, concentrating carefully on each move while their friends offer playful advice. Games like these provide simple entertainment after long workdays. You glance towards the window where the night outside looks deep and quiet compared with the bright interior of the tavern. The contrast makes the room feel even more welcoming. Inside there is warmth, light, and companionship. Outside, the countryside rests under the dark sky. As the evening continues, stories pass from table to table. Someone describes a storm that damaged a bridge on a nearby road. Another person shares news about prices at a distant market. A traveller explains how long it took his wagon to cross a muddy stretch of road after heavy rain. Each story adds another thread to the fabric of community knowledge. Eventually some of the visitors stand and prepare to leave. Lanterns are lit once again as people step out into the cool air to begin the walk home. The tavern slowly grows quieter, though the last conversations linger near the fire. You finish your cider and step back outside into the night. Above you the sky spreads wide and filled with stars. The road ahead leads into darkness, broken only by scattered lanterns and the distant glow from farmhouse windows. Travelling at night in 1787 requires patience and careful attention, because beyond the comfortable lights of town, the roads themselves hold challenges that make every journey an adventure. And tomorrow you will experience exactly how difficult it can be to move from one place to another in this young and growing nation. The warm noise of the tavern fades behind you as the door closes softly. Outside, the night feels wider and quieter. Lantern light spills briefly across the dirt road before the glow dims again as someone walks away toward a distant farmhouse. Above you, the sky stretches clear and full of stars, far brighter than most modern skies, because there are so few artificial lights to compete with them. You begin walking along the road that leads away from town. At first, the path seems easy enough to follow. The moon cast a pale silver light across the ground, revealing the familiar wagon ruts carved into the dirt. Crickets sing steadily from the tall grass along the edges of the road, and the breeze carries the cool scent of night air over the fields. But after a few minutes you begin to notice something. Travelling in 1787 is not nearly as simple as it might first appear. The road beneath your boots is uneven and unpredictable. One moment the ground feels firm and smooth. The next moment your foot sinks into a patch of softer earth left behind by the passing of heavy wagons earlier in the day. Accounts written by travellers in the late 18th century often describe American roads as rough and unreliable. Outside larger towns, many routes were little more than widened paths through forests or fields. Maintenance depended largely on local communities, which meant road conditions could vary greatly from one place to the next. You follow the faint curve of the road as it bends toward a cluster of trees. The darkness deepens beneath the branches and you instinctively slow your pace. Without lantern light, the shadows make it harder to see obstacles in your path. Some travellers carry lanterns or torches when moving after sunset, but many prefer simply to avoid nighttime journeys unless necessary. Even during daylight hours, travel can be slow. A wagon drawn by horses may move only a few miles per hour depending on the terrain. Hills, muddy ground, or damaged bridges can delay a journey for hours. You imagine what it must feel like to guide in a wagon across this road. The driver sits on a wooden bench, reins in hand, carefully guiding the horses, while the wheels bump over rocks and ruts. Every turn of the wheel sends vibrations through the wagon's frame. Long trips demand patience. A journey between towns that might take 20 minutes by car today could require an entire day of travel in the 18th century. You reach a small wooden bridge that crosses a narrow stream. The water below reflects the moonlight, creating a shimmering ribbon that winds through the grass. The bridge creaks quietly as you step onto its planks. Structures like this were essential for connecting farms and settlements across the countryside. Town records from the era frequently mention repairs to bridges damaged by storms or heavy wagons. When bridges failed, travellers sometimes had to search for alternate routes through shallow parts of the stream. You pause at the centre of the bridge and listen. The water flows gently beneath you, producing a soft and steady murmur. Somewhere in the distance, a horse neighs faintly from a nearby farm. You continue walking once you reach the other side. The road stretches forward into the darkness, but soon you notice a moving light approaching from the opposite direction. A lantern swings slowly from the side of a wagon. As the wagon draws closer, the sound of hooves striking the ground becomes clearer. The driver lifts a hand in greeting as he passes the lantern, casting a brief circle of light across the road before disappearing behind you. One curious habit mentioned in several early travel accounts involves how drivers sometimes hung small bells on their wagons during nighttime journeys. The ringing helped warn other travellers approaching along narrow roads where visibility was poor. The gentle sound of bells could prevent collisions long before headlights existed. You smile at the thought as the wagon disappears into the distance. While walking through the quiet countryside, historians often reflect on how travel limitations shaped early American communities. Because journeys required time and effort, people tended to form strong connections within their local regions. Markets, churches, and taverns served as central hubs because reaching distant towns frequently demanded careful planning. This slower pace of movement influenced trade communication and even political life. News travelled along these same roads you are walking now. Letters carried by riders, newspapers transported by wagon, travellers spreading stories from one town to the next. You reach a small rise in the road where the land opens wide in front of you. From here you can see scattered lantern lights glowing from farmhouses across the countryside. Each one represents a family settling in for the night after a long day of work. The quiet landscape feels peaceful. Yet the difficulty of travel means that these homes can sometimes feel surprisingly distant from one another. Neighbours may live only a mile apart, but muddy roads or heavy snow can turn that short distance into a slow journey. You begin walking back towards town as the night grows deeper. The lanterns gradually disappear as families extinguish their lights and retreat indoors. Soon the only illumination comes from the moon and the distant glow of the tavern window far behind you. Tomorrow morning, the roads will fill again with wagons carrying goods to market farmers, travelling between fields and messengers delivering letters across the growing nation. For now, though, the countryside rests under the quiet watch of the stars, and somewhere not far away, news from distant cities slowly makes its way along these same rough roads. Because in a world without instant messages or telephones, information travels only as fast as the people who carry it. You follow the quiet road back toward town, your steps slow beneath the wide night sky. The moon hangs high now, washing the countryside in a pale glow that reveals just enough detail to guide your path. The ruts in the road appear as faint silver lines, and the distant silhouettes of barns and fences stretch across the fields like gentle shadows. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once and then falls silent again. The world of 1787 sleeps early. Without bright lamps or electric lights, most people retreat indoors not long after darkness settles. Only a few windows still glow with the soft light of candles. Even the tavern you left earlier has grown quieter, its door closed and its laughter fading into memory. As you walk, you begin to think about something that connects every home, farm, and town across this young nation. News. In your own time, information arrives almost instantly, carried by glowing screens and invisible signals. But here in 1787, news travels at the pace of horses, wagons, and human voices. Letters, newspapers, and travellers form the fragile network that spreads information across the land. You reach the edge of town again and notice a small wooden post near the road. Attached to it is a board where several folded papers have been pinned beneath thin wooden slats. This is one of the ways communities share public information. Town notices may appear here announcing market days, legal announcements, or meetings of local officials. People passing by stop briefly to read the latest postings before continuing with their day. Printed newspapers also circulate through towns like this one. Printers operating in larger cities produce weekly or sometimes bi-weekly papers filled with political debates, shipping reports, advertisements, and news from abroad. Copies travel outward through networks of signeurs and wagons until they eventually reach even distant settlements. Letters from the late 18th century often describe how eagerly people awaited the arrival of newspapers. A single copy might be read by dozens of individuals as it passed from hand to hand. You imagine the scene inside the tavern earlier in the evening, a traveller arriving with a fresh newspaper from Philadelphia. Customers leaning closer as someone reads the latest stories aloud. Voices discussing what the news might mean for the future of the country. The slow arrival of information turns each update into a small event. One curious practice mentioned in several early American towns involved reading newspapers aloud in public spaces. Because not everyone could read easily, individuals who were comfortable with the printed word sometimes shared the news by speaking it to gathered listeners. The sound of a single voice reading the latest reports could fill a room with attentive silence. You step closer to the wooden post and examine one of the notices pinned to the board. The ink appears slightly faded under the moonlight, but the careful handwriting remains clear enough to read. It announces a meeting to discuss matters of local governance. Small gatherings like this played a significant role in shaping early American communities. Residents often participated directly in decisions affecting their towns through meetings where opinions were voiced openly. While observing this simple notice board, historians today often reflect on how information networks influenced political awareness during the early years of the United States. Some scholars suggest that newspapers and public readings helped spread revolutionary ideas quickly across the colonies and later the states. Others point out that limited transportation and uneven literacy meant many people still relied heavily on word of mouth rather than printed materials. The reality likely included both. Printed news travelled outward from cities. Stories and interpretations spread further through conversation. You continue walking through the quiet streets. The buildings that seemed lively earlier in the day now stand dark and still. The market square lies empty except for a few wagons resting near the edges. Their wheels cast long shadows across the ground beneath the moonlight. The same square that buzzed with bargaining voices only hours ago now feels almost peaceful enough to echo your footsteps. Somewhere nearby, a shutter closes gently as someone prepares for sleep. You glance towards the tavern door where a lantern still glows faintly beside the entrance. Inside, perhaps a few late travellers remain awake, finishing the last mugs of cider before heading to their beds. News conversation and travel all intertwine in places like that. Messages carried across muddy roads, stories shared between strangers, letters sealed carefully and sent with riders heading toward the next town. These small threads of communication gradually weave the distant parts of the nation together. You step into the middle of the square and pause for a moment. The stars above seem brighter now that most of the town's candles have been extinguished. Tomorrow morning, the same roads will carry farmers returning to market, merchants delivering goods, and riders bringing letters from far away. Perhaps one of those letters will carry news from Philadelphia, where important discussions about the future of the country continue quietly behind closed doors. But tonight the town rests. The notice board stands silent beside the road. The wagons remain still, and the slow movement of information continues somewhere out in the darkness beyond the hills. Because in 1787 every story must travel step by step before it finally arrives. The quiet square slowly disappears behind you as you wander toward the darker side of town. The night feels calm now, but the stillness carries a slightly different mood compared with the peaceful countryside. Lantern light flickers here and there from a few windows, casting thin stripes of gold across the dirt road. Somewhere nearby a door closes with a soft thud, followed by the sound of a bolt sliding into place. Even in small communities like this one, people think carefully about safety once darkness arrives. You continue walking past the empty market stalls, their wooden frames creaking gently in the breeze. The baskets that held vegetables earlier in the day now sit stacked neatly beside the wagons. Everything looks orderly and quiet. Yet every town must still maintain some form of law and order. Town records from the late 18th century show that many communities relied on a system of local constables and watchmen to maintain peace. These individuals were not professional police officers in the modern sense. Instead, they were ordinary citizens appointed to enforce rules, settle disputes, and respond when trouble appeared. You turn a corner and notice a lantern moving slowly along the road ahead. A man walks toward you carrying the light in one hand and a long wooden staff in the other. His pace is steady and his eyes move carefully from side to side as he watches the street. He is likely part of the night watch. Night watchmen often walked the streets during the late evening hours, checking that fires were safely contained and keeping an eye out for suspicious activity. Fire posed one of the greatest dangers in towns filled with wooden buildings, so preventing accidents became an important part of their responsibility. The watchman nods politely as he passes you. His lantern briefly illuminates the ground around your feet before its glow fades into the distance. A small but fascinating detail recorded in several early town ordinances involves the way watchmen sometimes called out the time and weather during their rounds. Every hour they might announce the hour of the night, along with remarks about the conditions, reassuring residents that someone remained awake and alert. You imagine hearing a voice drifting through the dark streets. 10 o'clock and all is well. The phrase would have carried comfort to those sleeping inside nearby homes. You continue walking until you reach a modest wooden building near the edge of the square. Its door stands closed, but a sign mounted beside it suggests that this place serves as the local jail. It is not large, Small towns rarely needed extensive facilities for holding prisoners. Many disputes were settled through fines or brief confinement rather than long prison sentences. Legal practices during this period often emphasized swift and visible punishment meant to discourage further trouble. Stocks and pillories sometimes appeared in town squares where offenders could be publicly shamed for minor crimes. Although the method may seem harsh today, many communities believed that public embarrassment discouraged repeat offences. You glance back toward the quiet square. It's easy to imagine how a crowd might gather here to witness such events during the daytime. While thinking about these practices, modern historians often examine how justice functioned in early American communities. Some researchers suggest that the close relationships between neighbours helped maintain order because everyone knew one another's reputations. Others note that local justice systems could also reflect personal conflicts or social tensions within small populations. The reality likely varied depending on the personalities and circumstances within each town. You walk a little further and notice another building with a slightly more official appearance. Its doorway bears a carved wooden sign identifying it as the meeting place for local magistrates. Inside, disputes over property debts or contracts might be discussed during daylight hours. Justice here often involves practical solutions rather than complicated legal procedures. Neighbours testify about events. Magistrates listen to both sides. Decisions are made based on local knowledge and the customs of the community. You pause beside the road and listen to the quiet night. A breeze rustles through nearby trees. The distant hoot of an owl echoes across the fields. The watchman's lantern glows faintly at the far end of the street as he continues his rounds. In a town this size, peace often depends less on strict enforcement and more on shared expectations about behaviour. People know one another's families, businesses, and histories. Reputation carries real weight. Those who break the rules risk more than legal punishment. They risk losing the trust of the entire community. The thought lingers as you begin walking again. Most nights pass without serious trouble. The watchman completes his rounds. Lanterns are extinguished one by one, and the town sleeps beneath the quiet sky. Yet the young nation itself still carries memories of conflict not far in the past. Only a few years earlier, soldiers marched across fields not so different from the ones surrounding this town. The war that created the United States still lives in the memories of many people walking these same roads. Some of the men you saw in the tavern earlier may have worn military coats during those difficult years. And tomorrow you'll begin to notice how those memories of war continue to shape daily life in ways both visible and subtle. Because although peace has returned to the countryside, the echoes of revolution remain close beneath the surface of the new nation. The town remains wrapped in quiet as you continue along the dim street. Most windows are now dark, their candles extinguished for the night. The lantern carried by the watchman has vanished around a distant corner, leaving only the pale glow of moonlight to guide your steps. Yet inside many of these homes, work has not completely stopped. You pass a small farmhouse near the edge of town where faint firelight still flickers through the window. The glow is soft and steady, suggesting someone inside is finishing the last tasks before sleep. You step quietly toward the door and listen. The gentle hum of a spinning wheel drifts through the wooden walls. Inside, a woman sits near the fireplace, turning the wheel slowly, while a length of wool stretches between her fingers. The thread grows longer with each careful movement as the fibres twist into yarn. Scenes like this appear frequently in letters and household records from the late 18th century. Women in early American homes carry enormous responsibility for producing goods needed by their families. Much of this labour happens inside the house, and rarely attracts the attention given to farming or trade, yet the work is constant and essential. You push the door open gently and step into the warm room. The spinning wheel turns with a quiet rhythm that blends with the soft crackle of the fire. A basket of raw wool rests near the woman's feet. Each handful will eventually become thread, which may later be woven into cloth for clothing or blankets. Cloth production requires many stages. First, the wool must be cleaned and combed. Then it is spun into thread. Later it may be woven on a loom to create fabric strong enough to be cut and sewn into garments. All of this takes time. You notice several folded pieces of fabric stacked neatly on a nearby table. Some appear newly woven, while others show patches where older cloth has been repaired. Women in households like this also manage cooking, childcare, sewing, cleaning, and the preservation of food. Fruits may be dried or turned into preserves. Vegetables are stored for winter use. Herbs are gathered and hung to dry along the walls. A single day often includes dozens of small but important tasks. One interesting household custom recorded in several rural diaries describes how women sometimes kept detailed mental inventories of stored food and supplies without writing anything down. Knowing exactly how much flour remained in the pantry or how many jars of preserves sat in the cellar helped families survive long winters when fresh food became scarce. This knowledge passed quietly from one generation to the next. You walk slowly around the room and notice a cradle positioned near the hearth. Inside, a baby sleeps peacefully beneath a soft blanket. The gentle rocking motion of the cradle suggests someone recently soothed the child to sleep before returning to their work. Caring for young children forms another major part of daily life. In families with many children, older siblings often assist with watching the younger ones, while adults complete household tasks. Cooperation becomes necessary because the demands of the farm rarely pause for long. You hear footsteps outside and the door opens again. Another woman enters carrying a small basket filled with freshly washed cloths. She hangs them near the fire where the warmth will finish drying them before morning. While observing this scene, historians often reflect on how much of women's work remained invisible in official records. Farming output trade agreements and political debates appear frequently in documents from the period. Household labour performed inside homes rarely received the same level of written attention. Yet without these daily efforts, families would struggle to survive. Cooking meals, producing cloth, preserving food, and caring for children created the foundation that allowed farms and businesses to function. You take a seat quietly near the table as the spinning wheel continues its steady turning. The room feels peaceful. Firelight glows across the wooden floor. Shadows move slowly along the walls as the flames shift within the hearth. Outside the window, the night remains calm and silent. Eventually, the woman stops the spinning wheel and carefully winds the finished thread onto a wooden spool. She places it beside several others already completed earlier in the evening. The collection of thread represents hours of careful work. Before heading to bed, she checks the fire once more and places another small log onto the embers. The flames brighten briefly, sending a warm glow across the room. The cradle beside the hearth rocks gently again as the baby stirs slightly in sleep. Soon the house will fall quiet like the rest of the town. Yet this evening routine reveals something important about life in 1787. Much of the work that sustains families happens quietly within homes, performed patiently day after day without public recognition. These unseen efforts help maintain the rhythm of daily life across farms, towns, and villages throughout the young nation. As the fire settles into glowing embers, the household prepares to rest. But beyond these peaceful homes, other parts of American society still face challenges that remain deeply woven into the nation's history. And tomorrow you will begin to see how those realities shape life for many people in ways that cannot be ignored. The farmhouse gradually settles into silence as the last chores of the evening come to an end. The spinning wheel has stopped turning. The fire burns low in the hearth, its glow now softer and deeper than before. Outside, the countryside rests beneath the quiet sky where the moon casts pale light across the fields and fences. Most people in the town are now asleep. Yet even in the calm of night, one reality of life in 1787 never disappears completely. Illness. You step quietly through the dim room and glance once more at the sleeping cradle beside the hearth. The baby inside breathes gently wrapped in a warm blanket. Moments like this feel peaceful, but families in this era always remain aware that health can change quickly. Medical care in the late 18th century looks very different from what most people expect today. Accounts written by doctors and patients during the 1780s describe a world where medicine relies heavily on observation, tradition, and remedies passed down through generations. Professional physicians exist, but many communities depend on local healers, midwives, or family members with practical knowledge of treatments. You step outside and walk slowly along the quiet road toward a nearby house, where a small lantern still burns in the window. Inside lives the town's physician. His home serves both as a residence and as a place where patients sometimes come seeking help. The room inside contains shelves filled with glass bottles, bundles of dried herbs and small metal instruments carefully arranged on wooden tables. Doctors in this period study medical texts and often apprentice under experienced practitioners before beginning their own work. Still, their understanding of disease remains limited compared with modern knowledge. Many treatments aim to balance what physicians believed were the body's internal forces. Bleeding herbal mixtures and purgative medicines appear frequently in medical journals of the time. You peer through the window and see the physician seated at a desk examining a handwritten note. Perhaps someone in town has sent word requesting his help during the night. Doctors often travel by horse to visit patients in their homes, carrying small medical kits filled with tools and medicines. One curious remedy mentioned in several 18th century medical guides involved the use of herbal poultices made from plants gathered in nearby fields or forests. Leaves, roots and flowers were crushed into mixtures believed to reduce swelling or draw infection away from wounds. Although the scientific reasoning behind such treatments was not always accurate, some of these natural remedies did provide real relief. You continue walking and notice a small garden beside the physician's house. Rows of plants grow carefully within its borders. Many early American healers cultivated gardens filled with medicinal herbs. Plants like chamomile, sage, mint and lavender were valued not only for cooking, but also for their calming or restorative qualities. Families sometimes kept their own small collections of healing plants as well. Herbal knowledge passed quietly between generations through experience and observation. You kneel beside one of the garden rows and touch a cluster of mint leaves. Their sharp scent fills the air instantly. While examining this quiet scene, modern historians continue to explore how medical knowledge developed during this period. Some scholars emphasize the importance of traditional remedies that later inspired scientific study. Others point out that certain widely accepted treatments of the era could be harmful when applied without understanding of infection or disease. The historical picture reflects both progress and limitation. You rise and continue walking toward the edge of town. A small building stands there with a wooden sign marking it as the apothecary shop. During the day, the shelves inside hold jars of powders, dried herbs, oils and tinctures prepared for different ailments. People visit apothecaries to purchase medicines recommended by physicians or remedies they believe might ease common problems such as headaches, fevers or stomach discomfort. The shop is closed now, but you imagine what it looks like during the day. Glass jars line neatly along wooden shelves, mortars and pestles used to grind herbs into powders. The air filled with mixed scents of spices, oils and dried plants. One small but surprising habit recorded in several family journals describes how people sometimes relied on familiar household ingredients as medicine. Honey, vinegar and garlic frequently appeared in homemade remedies believed to soothe coughs or strengthen the body during illness. While not every remedy proved effective, such practices reflected the determination of families to care for one another using whatever knowledge they possessed. You begin walking back toward the farmhouse where the quiet cradle waits beside the fire. The lantern in the physician's window finally dims as the flame is lowered for the night. Across the countryside, similar scenes unfold. Parents checking on sleeping children, farmers resting after long days of labour, doctors prepared to ride out if someone falls ill. Life in 1787 moves forward with courage and patience despite the uncertainty that illness can bring. Families rely on community knowledge, herbal remedies and the limited medical training available at the time. And as the night grows deeper, the town once again falls into complete stillness beneath the watchful stars. Tomorrow the sun will rise over the same fields and roads. Work will begin again, but the fragile balance between health and illness will always remain a quiet part of life in this young nation. The night deepens around the quiet town as you walk slowly back toward the centre of the settlement. The physician's lantern has finally gone dark and only the faint glow of moonlight remains to guide your steps along the dirt road. The houses stand silent now, their windows black against the pale sky. Yet even in peaceful communities like this one, disagreements and conflicts still appear from time to time. You pass the small building you noticed earlier, near the square, the one used by local magistrates during daylight hours. In the moonlight it looks almost ordinary, just another wooden structure among many others. But during the day this place becomes the centre of local justice. Communities in the late 18th century often manage legal matters through systems that feel both formal and surprisingly personal. Town documents from the period show that disputes between neighbours might be handled by local officials who already know the people involved. A disagreement over land boundaries, unpaid debts, or damaged property could be discussed in a meeting where witnesses and neighbours offer their perspectives. Justice unfolds in full view of the community. You imagine the scene inside the magistrate's room during a busy day. A wooden table stands at the centre, where the magistrate listens carefully to both sides of an argument. Farmers, merchants, and craftsmen gather along the walls, observing quietly while the discussion continues. The atmosphere likely feels serious but not overly complicated. Legal systems in early America aim to resolve problems quickly so that everyday life can continue without long delays. You walk a few steps further and reach the edge of the market square where a large wooden frame stands beside the road. Earlier in the day, you might not have paid much attention to it, but now you realize what it is. The stocks. Stocks were wooden structures designed to hold a person's feet or sometimes hands in place as a form of public punishment. Offenders accused of smaller crimes such as disorderly behaviour or minor theft might be placed in the stocks for a few hours while neighbours passed by. The goal was embarrassment rather than physical harm. Several early town records describe crowds gathering in market squares to observe these punishments. People sometimes spoke with the offender, offered criticism, or simply watched in corners as a reminder of the community's expectations. It may sound unusual today, but public accountability carried powerful meaning in tightly connected towns. You run your hand along the smooth wooden surface of the stocks and imagine how many individuals may have stood here over the years. A short distance away stands another device known as the pillory. Unlike the stocks, the pillory held a person upright with head and hands secured between wooden boards. The position made it impossible to walk away while townspeople gathered around. While these punishments appear harsh by modern standards or reforms, they were often used in place of long prison sentences that communities lacked the resources to support. Small towns rarely maintained large jails. Instead, visible punishments and fines served as deterrents meant to discourage repeated misbehaviour. You glance toward the quiet building that serves as the town jail. It remains dark and still tonight. Only the faint outline of its wooden door is visible beneath the moonlight. One unusual custom described in several colonial accounts involves the way some towns required individuals convicted of certain offences to stand publicly while wearing signs explaining their crimes. These signs allowed everyone passing by to understand why the punishment was taking place. Shame played a significant role in maintaining social order. While standing in the empty square, you think about how justice worked in communities where nearly everyone knew one another. Modern historians continue to examine the advantages and challenges of these local systems. Some researchers suggest that personal familiarity helped resolve disputes peacefully because neighbours often sought compromise. Others note that strong community ties could also create pressure that influenced decisions in ways not always completely fair. Both ideas appear in surviving court records and personal letters from the time. You begin walking again, crossing the quiet square where the market bustled with activity only hours ago. The wagons remain parked along the edges. A stray cat slips between them, moving silently through the shadows in search of food. The town feels calm tonight. No arguments echo across the square. No prisoners occupy the stocks. The watchman's lantern is nowhere in sight now, suggesting that his rounds have carried him to another part of town. Most nights pass without serious trouble. Neighbours settle their differences through conversation before matters reach the magistrate's table. Communities depend on cooperation because survival in rural America requires shared effort. You pause once more near the centre of the square. The moonlight illuminates the empty benches where merchants sat earlier, discussing trade. The tavern door remains closed. The church steeple rises quietly against the sky. Every building here represents another part of daily life in this growing nation. Work, faith, trade, law, all woven together within a small community trying to find balance in a new country still discovering its identity. Soon the sky will begin its slow transition toward morning again, and when daylight returns, another part of life in 1787 will come into view. Because although the town sleeps peacefully tonight, memories of the recent war that created this nation still shape the lives of many people who live here. The echoes of that conflict remain close beneath the surface of everyday life. The quiet square slowly gives way to the first faint hints of dawn. You remain standing near the wooden stocks as the sky above the rooftops begins to change colour. At first it is only a subtle fading of darkness. Then a soft grey light spreads across the horizon, gently pushing the stars away. Morning is returning to the town. A rooster calls from somewhere behind the barns, its voice sharp and confident in the still air. Soon another answers from farther down the road. The chorus spreads slowly across the countryside as farms wake one by one. You walk along the empty street while the first glow of sunrise touches the tops of the buildings. For many of the men who live in this town, mornings like this once began very differently. Only a few years earlier, the countryside looked much the same, yet the sound of marching boots and distant gunfire sometimes replaced the quiet calls of farm animals. The Revolutionary War ended not long before the year you're experiencing now. Letters written by soldiers and civilians during the 1780s describe how memories of that conflict still lingered in daily conversation. Veterans returned to their farms and workshops carrying stories of battles, long marches and uncertain victories. You pass the tavern again as the door opens slowly from the inside. A man steps out into the early light and stretches his arms toward the sky. His coat hangs loosely around his shoulders, and the posture suggests someone who may have spent many nights sleeping outdoors during years of military service. Several men in towns like this once served in local militias. Militia units formed the backbone of many colonial defences during the war. Farmers, blacksmiths and merchants trained with muskets and drilled together when called upon by local leaders. Now those same individuals have returned to ordinary life, but traces of their experience remain. You notice a long musket resting beside the tavern wall, likely belonging to one of the men inside. Firearms remain common possessions in many households, used not only for defence but also for hunting. A small group of men gathers near the edge of the square, speaking quietly as the sun begins to rise. One of them gestures with his hand while describing a location somewhere beyond the hills. Perhaps he is recalling a battle or a difficult march through unfamiliar territory. Stories from the war still circulate through communities across the young nation. One interesting observation found in several veterans' letters involves the way former soldiers sometimes continued meeting informally after the war ended. They gathered in taverns or town squares to share memories and maintain the friendships formed during years of service. These quiet reunions helped veterans adjust to the return of ordinary life. You walk closer to the group and notice how their conversation gradually shifts from past battles to present concerns. Crops, trade, local politics. Life moves forward even while memories remain. Across the street, another man opens the door of a small shop and begins sweeping dust from the entrance. His movement suggests someone eager to begin the day's work. The town itself shows little visible damage from the war. Yet historians studying the period often point out that the economic and political consequences of the conflict continued shaping American society long after the final battles ended. Soldiers returned home expecting recognition for their sacrifices. Government struggled with debts created during the war. Communities debated how the new nation should be organized. Many of those debates eventually led to the important meetings happening in Philadelphia during this very year. You glance down the road where the rising sun now spreads warm light across the fields beyond the town. A wagon approaches slowly from the countryside, its driver guiding a pair of horses toward the market square. The wheels creak softly as they roll over the uneven ground. The new day has begun. Farmers return with goods to sell. Merchants prepare their shops. Children will soon appear carrying buckets or bundles of firewood. Life resumes its familiar rhythm. Yet beneath that routine lies the shared memory of a struggle that created this nation only a short time ago. Some of the buildings you see may have served as meeting places where local leaders planned their resistance against British authority. Some of the fields beyond town may once have held militia drills as volunteers prepared for battle. Now those same spaces host markets, church gatherings, and peaceful conversations. The transformation feels remarkable. You stand quietly at the edge of the square as sunlight continues spreading across the town. The men who spoke about their wartime experiences begin drifting away toward their homes and businesses. Their voices fade into the growing sounds of morning activity. The town returns fully to its daily routine. But the influence of the war has not completely disappeared. It continues shaping the political discussions, economic decisions, and personal ambitions of people living in this young republic. And as the sun rises higher over the rooftops, another topic begins to surface in conversations across towns and cities throughout the country: the future of the nation itself. Because the debates about how this new country should govern itself are far from finished. Morning sunlight spreads across the town square as you remain standing near the wagons that have begun arriving for the day's trade. The quiet conversations among farmers and merchants slowly grow louder, while shop doors open one by one along the street. The town is waking again, but the tone of discussion today feels slightly different. You notice several men gathered near a wooden table outside the tavern. Their voices carry a thoughtful seriousness rather than the relaxed laughter of the previous night. They are talking about politics. In the years following the Revolutionary War, conversations about government appear frequently in places like this. The United States exists as a new nation, but its structure remains uncertain. Leaders across the states are still deciding how authority should be organized and how much power different levels of government should hold. Records from the late 1780s reveal that ordinary citizens often discussed political matters in everyday settings such as taverns, marketplaces, and churchyards. Formal meetings between elected officials certainly took place, yet many of the most energetic debates unfolded among neighbours sharing news and opinion over cups of cider. You walk closer to the group and listen quietly. One man speaks about the gathering of delegates in Philadelphia, where important discussions are underway regarding the future framework of the nation. Another man raises concerns about whether a strong central government might threaten the freedoms people fought to secure during the war. Their voices remain calm, but the topic clearly matters deeply. Political awareness in communities like this grew rapidly during the years surrounding the Revolution. Pamphlets, newspapers, and public speeches encouraged citizens to think carefully about the direction of the new republic. Many people who had never before taken part in political debates suddenly found themselves discussing taxation, representation, and constitutional principles. You sit down on a nearby bench while the conversation continues. The man who spoke earlier gestures toward a folded newspaper resting on the table. It contains recent reports from Philadelphia, describing the ongoing convention where delegates are attempting to design a stronger national government. The details remain uncertain because the discussions are held behind closed doors, yet the possibility of a new constitution excites some citizens, while worrying others. Across the square, a merchant listens carefully while arranging goods in his shop window. Even those not actively speaking appear interested in the outcome of these debates. The future of the country affects everyone. One curious habit from this period involves how political pamphlets circulated through communities. Individuals sometimes read these pamphlets aloud to neighbours gathered in taverns or homes, allowing people who did not own copies to hear the arguments and decide for themselves what they believed. These public readings often sparked lively discussions that continued long into the evening. You imagine the scene unfolding again tonight inside the tavern. Lanterns glow against the wooden walls, someone standing beside the fireplace holding a pamphlet, listeners leaning forward as the words describing liberty, representation, and federal power echo across the room. The ideas carried within those printed pages help shape the political identity of the young nation. While observing this conversation, historians today continue exploring how widespread political engagement truly was among ordinary Americans during this period. Some evidence suggests that enthusiasm for debate reached surprisingly large portions of the population. Other studies indicate that participation varied depending on education wealth and access to printed materials. The surviving records show a mixture of both enthusiasm and uneven involvement. You stand and walk toward the edge of the square where a group of farmers now unload sacks of grain from a wagon. Their discussion focuses more on crop prices than constitutional theory. Life continues alongside political debate. Families still need food. Tools still need repair. Markets must open each morning. Yet the conversation about government remains present in the background of daily life. You pass the church again, where several townspeople gather near the steps exchanging greetings before beginning their workday. One man carries a folded pamphlet beneath his arm, perhaps planning to read it later. The town feels alive with quiet curiosity about the future. Everyone senses that something important is taking shape somewhere beyond the hills in the city of Philadelphia. As the sun climbs higher in the sky, the marketplace fills once more with the sounds of bargaining voices and moving wagons. The political discussion gradually fades into ordinary conversation about crops and trade, but the ideas spoken here will travel with the people who heard them. Farmers will think about them while working in the fields. Merchants will mention them while serving customers. Travellers will carry them along the roads connecting distant towns. The future constitution remains only a possibility for now. Yet even here in this quiet community, the debate has already begun shaping how people imagine the nation they are building together. And as the day continues to unfold, another side of American life in 1787 begins to appear. Because while some citizens gather to debate liberty and government, other people living within the same country experience a very different reality. The market square grows busier as the morning advances. Wagons arrive carrying baskets of produce, bundles of firewood, and sacks of grain. Farmers call greetings to one another, while merchants begin arranging their goods across wooden tables. You walk slowly through the crowd, listening to the familiar sounds of bargaining and conversation. Life in the town appears energetic and hopeful, yet not every person in America in 1787 experiences this sense of independence. As you move beyond the square and follow a road toward a larger farm outside town, another side of daily life becomes visible. The land spreads wide here, divided into large fields of tobacco and grain. Several workers move steadily through the rows under the growing heat of the sun. Their pace is quiet and constant. Unlike the farmer you followed earlier, these workers do not appear to own the land they cultivate. Accounts written during the late 18th century make clear that slavery remained deeply embedded in many parts of American society. Enslaved men, women, and children were forced to work on farms, plantations, and in households across several regions of the young nation. You stand beside the fence and observe the scene carefully. A group of workers bends over the crops while a supervisor rides slowly along the edge of the field. The work looks exhausting. The sun grows stronger with each passing hour and the rows of plants stretch across the land without shade. For enslaved people, the workday often begins before sunrise and continues until evening. Their labour helps produce crops that support both local economies and international trade. Tobacco, rice, indigo, and other goods grown through forced labour travel across oceans to markets in Europe and beyond. The economic success of many plantations depends heavily on this system. You walk quietly along the fence line, aware that the peaceful countryside you have been exploring contains realities far more complex dessa musste artista media at first. Some enslaved workers carry tools used for clearing weeds or gathering crops. Others move towards a nearby building that likely serves as storage for harvested goods. A small group of children sits near the edge of the field sorting bundles of plants under the watchful eyes of adults. One detail mentioned in several personal narratives from enslaved individuals describes how families often tried to preserve small moments of culture and identity despite the harsh conditions they faced. Songs, stories, and traditions passed quietly from one generation to the next helped maintain a sense of community within enslaved populations. These traditions sometimes took place in the evenings after work ended. You continue walking toward the farmhouse where the landowner lives. The house stands larger than many others in the region. Wide windows overlook the fields and the surrounding yard appears carefully maintained. Several horses rest near the stable while a wagon waits nearby. The contrast between the large home and the distant workers in the field is difficult to ignore. Discussions about slavery already exist during this period, though opinions vary widely depending on location and personal belief. Some individuals speak openly about the moral problems created by human bondage, while others defend the practice as necessary for economic survival. Historians examining this era continue studying how these conflicting viewpoints shaped political decisions in the early United States. Debates about the role of slavery will eventually influence many of the nation's most important historical events. You step away from the fence and walk back toward the road leading to town. The sounds of the field grow quieter behind you. Birds circle above the crops while the workers continue their steady labour beneath the rising sun. Back in town, the marketplace remains full of activity. Customers examine produce. Shopkeepers greet travellers arriving from distant roads. The lively atmosphere contrasts sharply with the quiet intensity of the work you just observed beyond the fields. Life in America during 1787 contains many layers. Some people experience independence and opportunity in the growing nation. Others endure conditions of forced labour and limited freedom. Both realities exist side by side within the same countryside. You pause near the edge of the square and watch the movement of people carrying goods from wagons to stalls. Children run past chasing one another between baskets of vegetables. A merchant laughs while weighing a bag of flour for a customer. The town appears peaceful again, but the larger story of the nation continues unfolding across farms, plantations, cities, and frontier settlements. As the day moves toward an afternoon, the marketplace slowly begins preparing for something else entirely, because every so often communities pause their work to celebrate. Music, dancing, and shared meals offer moments of joy that break the steady rhythm of labour. And before long you will see how even in a demanding world like this, people still find time to gather for festivals and celebrations. The afternoon sun settles warmly over the town as the marketplace continues its lively rhythm. Wagons still arrive along the dusty road, though now the mood in the square feels lighter than it did earlier. Voices rise with laughter, and the pace of bargaining slows as people begin finishing their purchases for the day. You notice something different unfolding near the far edge of the square. A small group of musicians has gathered beneath the shade of a tall tree. One man holds a fiddle, while another adjusts a small drum. Nearby, several women spread cloths across a wooden table and begin arranging baskets of food. The atmosphere hints at something beyond ordinary market activity. Communities in the late 18th century occasionally paused their routine work to share moments of celebration. Surviving town records and personal letters describe gatherings where neighbours came together for harvest festivals, weddings, and seasonal holidays. These events offer rare chances to relax after long periods of labour. You walk closer and watch as the fiddler draws his bow across the strings. The music rises bright and cheerful, drifting across the square and attracting curious listeners. Children immediately gather nearby, clapping their hands while trying to imitate the rhythm with small steps. Soon a few adults join them. The first dancers move cautiously, laughing as they find the tempo of the tune. Boots tap against the ground while skirts swirl gently through the afternoon air. In a world where work fills most daylight hours, music becomes a powerful invitation to pause and enjoy the moment. You take a seat on a nearby bench and observe the scene unfolding. The food table now holds pies, bread, roasted vegetables, and jars of preserves. People contribute dishes from their own kitchens, creating a shared meal that anyone attending may enjoy. One interesting tradition mentioned in several early American communities involves the practice of communal feasts during harvest season. When crops were successfully gathered, neighbours sometimes hosted gatherings where families brought food and music filled the evening. These celebrations strengthened social bonds and allowed people to express gratitude for a productive year. The fiddler begins another tune faster this time. A pair of dancers step forward, confidently guiding the others through simple movements. The pattern repeats as more people join, forming a loose circle around the musicians. The laughter of children echoes across the square. You notice how people who spent the morning negotiating prices now stand side by side sharing stories and food. Farmers, merchants, and travellers blend together easily in the relaxed atmosphere. Moments like this reveal an important part of life in early American communities. While hard work dominates most days, opportunities for social gatherings help maintain strong relationships between neighbours. The town depends on cooperation. When barns need repair or crops must be harvested quickly, families often help one another. Celebrations provide a chance to recognise that shared effort. A young boy runs past carrying a wooden hoop, still playing the game you saw earlier. Another child tries to mimic the fiddler by tapping two sticks together like drumsticks. Nearby, a group of older men sits beneath the tree discussing stories from past harvests while sipping cider from wooden mugs. You glance toward the church steeple rising above the rooftops. Gatherings like this sometimes follow religious holidays or community announcements made during services. Church calendars often help coordinate events that bring entire towns together. Scholars studying early American social life continue examining how these celebrations influenced community cohesion. Some historians emphasize that festivals and shared meals created valuable opportunities for cooperation and mutual support. Others suggest that these gatherings also reinforced social hierarchies because wealthier families often contributed larger amounts of food or hosted events on their property. Both observations appear in surviving letters and journals from the era. You accept a slice of pie offered by a woman standing near the table. The crust tastes warm and buttery, while the filling carries the sweet flavour of apples harvested from nearby orchards. The simple dessert feels like a reward for the long hours of labour that define most days here. The fiddler pauses briefly to tune his instrument before beginning another lively melody. Several couples continue dancing while others clap in time with the music. The entire square now feels transformed from the busy marketplace you saw earlier. Where sacks of grain once changed hands and merchants negotiated prices, people now share laughter, food, and music. The celebration does not last forever. As the sun begins its slow descent toward the horizon, families gradually gather their belongings and prepare to return home. Children grow tired from dancing. The musicians lower their instruments. Neighbours say their goodbyes with promises to meet again soon. You stand and take one last look across the square. Moments like this remind you that life in 1787 contains more than constant labour and political debate. Amid fields, workshops and market stalls, people still find ways to celebrate the simple joy of community. And as evening approaches, once again the town prepares for another transition. Because beyond the familiar farms and villages lies a vast landscape where settlers continue pushing into the new territory. The frontier. As the music fades in the town square and families begin drifting back toward their homes, your path turns away from the familiar cluster of buildings and out toward the open road once again. The celebration has left the town glowing with a quiet warmth, yet beyond the last fences and orchards stretches a very different landscape, the frontier. You follow the narrow road until the houses begin thinning into scattered cabins, surrounded by rough fields and newly cut stumps. The land looks wilder here. Trees grow thicker along the hills and the road becomes less defined with every step. In the late 18th century, much of the land west of established towns still remains only partially settled. Contemporary letters written by farmers and travellers often describe the sense of possibility that frontier regions offered to families seeking land and independence. New settlements appear slowly as pioneers move outward, clearing forests and building homes in places that only a few years earlier might have been untouched woodland. You pass a small wagon stopped beside the road. A family works quietly nearby, unloading bundles of tools and supplies. The father studies the ground carefully while the mother spreads cloth across a wooden crate. Two children gather sticks from the edge of the forest, perhaps preparing the first fire for the evening. They appear to be beginning a new life here. Many families who move toward the frontier hope to claim land where they could build farms of their own. Land ownership represented opportunity in a society where independence carried enormous value. The process, however, demanded remarkable determination. You look around and notice the marks of recent clearing. Several large tree stumps remain in the soil where trunks have been cut away with axes. The surrounding ground shows signs of careful labour as settlers prepare the land for crops. One observer from the era wrote that clearing a single acre of forest could require weeks of effort with simple hand tools. You walk a little further along the road and spot a small cabin rising beside a stream. Its walls consist of stacked logs sealed with clay to block wind and rain. Smoke drifts slowly from the chimney while a small garden grows beside the entrance. Cabins like this formed the first homes for many frontier settlers. Building materials often came directly from the surrounding forest. Trees provided logs for walls, boards for doors, and branches for fencing. Families relied heavily on their own labour to create shelter quickly before winter arrived. You approach the cabin quietly and notice several tools leaning against the wall. An axe, a wooden plough, a shovel worn smooth by long use. Each tool represents another step in transforming wilderness into farmland. One interesting detail described in several frontier diaries involves the practice of neighbours gathering together to help build cabins for new arrivals. These gatherings sometimes became known as cabin raisings. With many hands working together, the walls of a small home could be assembled in a single day. The event often ended with the shared food and music turning hard labour into a community celebration. Even in isolated regions, cooperation remained essential. You follow the stream for a short distance and listen to the water flowing gently over smooth stones. Birds call from the treetops while the wind moves softly through the leaves. The frontier carries a peaceful beauty, but it also presents serious challenges. Families living here must rely heavily on their own skills and resilience. Markets and towns may lie many miles away, making travel difficult during bad weather or winter months. Food must be grown locally. Tools must be repaired at home. Unexpected illness or injury can become dangerous when medical help remains far away. Scholars studying early American expansion often discuss the complicated effects of frontier settlement. Some emphasize how new farms and towns allowed families to pursue independence and economic opportunity. Others focus on the impact that expansion had on indigenous communities who had lived on these lands long before European settlers arrived. The story of the frontier contains many perspectives. You stand beside the stream and watch the sunlight fade slowly across the trees. The sky begins to change colour again as evening approaches. The family you saw earlier continues arranging their belongings near the chateau. Soon they will begin constructing their cabin or preparing a temporary shelter for the night. Their journey represents the hopes of many people during this period. The promise of land, the chance to build something new, the opportunity to create a future that feels entirely their own. You turn back toward the road leading to town as the first evening shadows stretch across the ground. Behind you the frontier grows quiet again, its forests and streams waiting patiently for the next group of settlers who will arrive seeking their own place in this expanding nation. And as you walk slowly beneath the soft colours of the sunset, you begin to reflect on everything you have seen during this long day in 1787. From bustling marketplaces to quiet farmhouses, from candle-lit churches to distant frontier cabins, all of it forms part of the everyday life of a nation still learning how to define itself. Soon night will return once more, and with it comes a final moment to look back on the ordinary lives that quietly shaped the future of the United States. You leave the quiet frontier behind and follow the road slowly back toward the town. The sun now sits low on the horizon, casting long amber light across the fields and fences. Evening settles gently across the countryside, bringing with it a peaceful stillness after the busy hours of the day. Smoke rises from chimneys once again as families begin preparing their evening meals. From a distance, the town looks calm and welcoming, its rooftops glowing softly beneath the fading light. The sounds of the marketplace have mostly disappeared now. Wagons that filled the square earlier have already begun returning to nearby farms. You walk along the road at an easy pace, listening to the evening sounds of rural America. Crickets begin their steady music in the tall grass. A cow calls from a distant barn. Somewhere nearby, a door creaks open as someone steps outside to collect water before nightfall. Life in the late 18th century often followed this gentle pattern. Daylight filled with labour, evening filled with quiet routines. Letters and journals from the time frequently describe how families gathered together at the end of the day to share food and conversation before resting for the night. These evening hours provided a rare pause when work slowed enough for reflection. You pass a farmhouse where lantern light glows through the window. Inside, a family sits around a wooden table finishing supper. The simple meal appears similar to the one you shared earlier. Bread, vegetables, and perhaps a small portion of meat placed carefully at the centre of the table. A child leans sleepily against the shoulder of a parent while listening to the quiet conversation. Moments like this form the foundation of daily life across the young nation. You continue walking and soon reach the edge of town once again. The church steeple rises above the rooftops, its outline dark against the colourful sky. A few people linger near the steps, speaking softly before returning home. Further along the street, the tavern door opens briefly as someone steps outside carrying a lantern. Even though the town grows quieter, a few places still hold small gatherings where neighbours exchange stories about the day's events. One curious habit mentioned in several early American memoirs involves the tradition of storytelling during evening hours. Before widespread entertainment or printed books were common, in many homes, families often shared stories aloud. These stories might include tales of travel lessons from religious texts or recollections of recent historical events such as the War for Independence. Children listening to these stories absorbed both entertainment and knowledge at the same time. You pause in the centre of the square and look around. Earlier this place bustled with trade and music. Now the wagons stand empty and the stalls rest quietly beneath the darkening sky. The transformation feels almost magical. While reflecting on the peaceful town, historians today continue discussing how communities like this balanced independence with cooperation. Early American society often celebrated individual freedom, yet survival in rural environments required neighbours to rely on one another for help during harvests, building projects, and difficult seasons. The balance between independence and community support helped shape the character of many early settlements. You sit down on one of the wooden benches and watch the last light fade from the rooftops. The sky deepens from orange to purple and finally into the rich blue of approaching night. One by one, the stars begin appearing above the quiet town. A lantern glows in the tavern window. Another shines from the doorway of the apothecary shop. The rest of the buildings settle gradually into darkness. Tomorrow morning, the cycle will begin again. Farmers will return to their fields. Merchants will reopen their shops. Children will carry buckets and gather eggs. The routines of everyday life will continue just as they have for years. Yet the small moments you witness today reveal something important. History is not made only by famous leaders or dramatic battles. It also grows from the ordinary actions of people living their daily lives. The farmers who rise before dawn. The mothers spinning thread beside the fire. The children learning letters on slates. The merchants weighing grain in the marketplace. Each of them contributes quietly to the story of the young nation. You stand from the bench and begin walking slowly towards the road leading out of town. The night has returned fully now. The town sleeps beneath the stars. And as you take one final look at the peaceful streets of 1787 America, the long journey through this day begins to settle gently into memory. Only one final moment remains. A quiet pause to let the sounds and images of this world fade softly into the night. You stand at the edge of the quiet road while the town settles fully into night once again. The lanterns in the windows have grown faint, and most homes now rest in darkness beneath the open sky. Only the soft glow of the moon spreads across the rooftops and fields, painting everything in pale silver. The same streets that bustled with trade and laughter earlier now lie completely still. You walk slowly through the square one last time. Your footsteps echo softly against the packed dirt ground where wagons once stood, and farmers called out prices for grain and vegetables. The wooden stalls sit empty. The tavern door remains closed. Even the church stands silent, its steeple pointing upward toward the quiet stars. A full day of life in 1787 has passed. As you wander past the familiar buildings, the memories of everything you saw begin to gather together like pages in a story. You remember the early morning when smoke rose from chimneys and farmers stepped into the fields before the sun fully appeared. You remember the busy market square filled with wagons, baskets of produce and voices bargaining over trade. You remember the spinning wheel humming softly inside the farmhouse while children practiced their letters on a slate. These ordinary scenes form the rhythm of life across much of the young United States. People living during this time rarely thought of themselves as characters in history. They focused instead on planting crops, repairing tools, raising families and helping their neighbours through the changing seasons. Yet the routines of these everyday lives quietly shaped the future of the nation. Contemporary observers writing during the late 18th century often remarked on the strong sense of independence developing among American communities. Many citizens believed that the ability to manage their own farms, towns, and local affairs represented one of the greatest achievements of the new republic. You walk toward the edge of the square where the road stretches into darkness. The countryside beyond remains peaceful. Faint lights glow from scattered farmhouses while the distant sound of crickets fills the night air. Life here moves at a slower pace than most people today would recognize. Information travels by horseback. Tools are shaped by hand. Light comes from candles and fire. One small but fascinating custom described in several family journals involves the way people sometimes measured the passing of time at night. Without widespread clocks, individuals occasionally estimated the hour by observing the position of familiar stars in the sky. The stars above you shine brightly now, untouched by the glow of modern cities. You pause for a moment and look upward. The sky appears vast and quiet. While reflecting on this peaceful scene, scholars today continue examining how daily life in the 1780s contributed to the development of American identity. Some historians emphasize the importance of rural independence and small community cooperation. Others focus on the growing political debates and social challenges that shaped the nation's future. Both perspectives reveal important parts of the story. The everyday lives you witness today existed alongside larger events unfolding across the country. Delegates in Philadelphia were discussing the structure of a new government. Farmers were expanding into frontier lands. Merchants were building trade networks that reached across oceans. At the same time, families gathered around simple tables to share meals and stories before going to sleep. The quiet world of ordinary people supported the grander movements of history. You begin walking slowly away from the town. Behind you, the buildings fade into shadow while the road stretches gently through the fields. The cool night air carries the scent of grass and distant wood smoke. Somewhere a dog barks once before falling silent again. The countryside returns to complete stillness. In a few hours, the first rooster will call again. Smoke will rise from chimneys. Wagons will roll toward the marketplace. Another day in 1787 will begin just as this one did. But for now, the land rests peacefully beneath the stars. You take one final look at the quiet town in the distance. The farms, homes, churches and taverns you explored today represent only a small glimpse of the many lives that shaped early America. Yet within those ordinary moments lies the deeper truth of history. Nations are not built only in grand halls or battlefields. They grow slowly through the daily work, hopes and decisions of countless individuals whose names rarely appear in books. The wind moves softly across the fields. The stars shine above, and the world of 1787 gently fades into silence. Now the night grows calmer and the pace of the story slows with it. You can imagine the town drifting deeper into sleep as the final embers in fireplaces glow softly before turning to ash. The crickets continue their quiet music while the breeze moves gently through the trees surrounding the fields. The roads you walk today grow empty again. The market stalls rest. The wagons stand still beside barns and fences. Inside the houses, families sleep beneath quilts sewn by careful hands. Children dream beside windows where moonlight slips quietly across the floor. Farmers rest their tired muscles after the long work of the day. Everything feels peaceful now. You may still hear the distant murmur of a stream beyond the fields or the soft rustle of leaves moving in the night air. But nothing rushes here. Nothing demands your attention. The town will wake again soon enough, but for this moment the world remains calm and quiet. And as the night continues stretching across the countryside, the story of this day slowly settles like dust after a long journey. You have walked the streets, fields, homes, and gathering places of a young nation, learning how to live with freedom, responsibility, and hope. Now it is time to rest. The lanterns fade, the stars shine softly above, and the peaceful rhythm of life in 1787 drifts gently into sleep.